Hello everyone, this is Word for Word Talk. You're welcome to my channel. How are you? How have you been doing? I just wanted to share something with you that is going on that just in the UK. So this is about the King. He's making his first parliamentary speech in over 70 years, you know. So you know that his mom, the Queen of England, was the one making this speech at the parliament. But since she passed, this is the first time someone else is doing it for over 70 years. In this particular speech, it's called the speech from the throne. The king makes a speech, and this provides the government with an opportunity to outline their priority for the future or for the months ahead. And it's a very important part of the government. It's a state opening. It's a state opening of the parliament ceremony, you know, for the year. And so the king has to deliver the speech, and then the parliament, they have to now take all that the king has said and then deliberate on it and debate on it, and you know, kind of just chew it and digest it and decide what they're going to do with it, what should come first or what they should do next. They kind of outline what they're going to do for the next few months ahead of them. And it's very lovely to watch. You know, it's a kind of a ceremony that, you know, it's not common everywhere. Most most countries don't have this style of governing, you know, that the king has to come to the parliament, make speech, and then go home, and you know, all of that stuff. So I'm going to play for you to watch. Let me know what you think. I think it's such a good ceremony to watch. It's a kind of an event, really, in the UK. It's an event that we enjoy. So I want you to have a good watch and enjoy it as well. Thank you. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Click the notification button so that when we're on, you will be notified. And you have a wonderful day. Let me know what you think. Bye-bye.
Number 11 just forward. Now. 10 just back. Now. Number 13 just forward. Now. 12 just forward. Now. 15 just back. 15 still. 14 just forward. Now. 20 just back. Still just forward. 20 just forward. Still. 23 just forward. Still. 23 just back. 23 just back. Still. 22 just back. Still. Stand still. The front back. Right half division. Turn on! Turn on! The 5 just forward. Still! The 6 just forward. The 6 just back. Still. The 5 just forward. Still. The 6 just forward. Still. The 7 just forward. Still. Just back. Just back 7. Still. 6 just back. Still. 5 left boot forward. Left boot forward. Still. 9 just back. still, 8 just back, left boot 8, still, 10 just back, still, 11 just forward, still, 11 just back, still, 12 just forward, still, just back, still, 13 just forward, 13 just back, 14 just forward, 14, still, just back, still, 15 just forward, still, carry on, 15 just back, still, 14 just back, 14 just back, still, 13, left go, just back, still, 16 just forward, 16 still, 17 just forward, 17 just back, still, 18 just forward, still, 19 just forward, still, carry on, 20 just forward, 20, still, 24 just back, still, two just forward, one just back,
Hello, just experience.
two just back, still, one slightly,
I'm going to be live for an hour, so
again, still, 3 just forward, right boot, 3,
I don't actually know. I mean, I'm
still,
13 for that,
5
so I
just
don't know.
forward,
But in the moment
still,
you can see.
that's right boot back, still, number 6 just forward, again, still, turn
I'm
on!
just moving it slightly. Yes, yeah, I am.
8 just forward,
If you
eight
do
just
roll
back.
on that, so you'll have to
still,
start.
number 9 just forward, again, still just back
Yeah, make
slightly,
it. Cool.
still,
Yeah.
number 10 just forward,
Thank you very
turn
much.
on! 11 just back, still, just forward slightly, 11, still, 14 just forward, 14, still, 14 just back, still, 16 just forward, still, 17 just forward, still, turn on, 18 carry on, 20 just forward, 20, still, 19 just forward, still, 21 just forward, just back, still, 20 just forward,
I am watching
still, 22 just forward,
so if you want to, like I've done
still, stand still, the rear rank, right hook, division,
but when I figure you're on it, I will. Yeah, but also bear in mind it's cool as well.
still, turn on,
Right, if you can take that.
two left, just forward, still, 3 just forward, still, 4 just forward, 4 just back, still, 5 just back, still, 6 right boot just back, still, left boot forward, again, still, number 7 just forward, still, 7 just back, still, 8 just forward, still, 7 just forward, still, left boot, number 8 just back, still, number 9, left boot forward, still, right boot back, 10 just forward, and again, 10 just back, still, carry on! 11 just forward, carry on! 11 just back, just forward, 11 just forward, still, 14 just forward, still, 14 left move, back, 18 just forward, still, 17 just forward, 16 just back, still, right boot back, 16, right boot 16, 18 just forward, still, just back, still, 19 just forward, 18 just back, still, 20 just forward, and again, still, 21 just forward, still, 23 just back, still, stand still, the rear run, the left path, position.
Hello, good morning. It's more than 70 years since a King's rather than a Queen's speech was last delivered at the state opening of Parliament. But that is all due to change within the next hour or so. Although as Prince of Wales, King Charles did travel to Parliament last year to read the Queen's speech on his mother's behalf, today is the first time he will perform the role as monarch. His speech, which will set out the government's agenda for the next session of Parliament, is also a first for Rishi Sunak. He was still Boris Johnson's Chancellor at the last state opening of Parliament. And with today's King's speech all but certain to be the last before the next general election, Mr Sunak will be hoping that the policies about to be announced will be enough to help reverse the polls and ensure he's still in post for a second King's speech. We'll see how that goes. Well, all of the usual pomp and ceremony is getting underway right now. You can see there from the pictures that we're on from Buckingham Palace. And here to guide us through all of it are our political editor, Beth Rigby, and Andrew Blick, who is the director of the Centre for British Politics and Government at King's College London. It'll be a very busy morning and early afternoon for us. Great to have you both with us. Beth, I just want to pick up with you first on the politics, because, OK, the King's delivering the speech, but it's written by Number 10, by the government. What is Rishi Sunak hoping to achieve here?
Well, look, it's the first King's speech for Prince Charles. It's the first King's speech for the Prime Minister. And I think there's one man that will be confident that he will be doing it again after an election, and that isn't at the moment necessarily the Prime Minister, because he is still massively behind in the polls. He has a number of events over the autumn in which he can try and do the Rishi reset, as we dubbed it, as conference, but I have to say I don't think that this is going to be the moment for him, in that there is new legislation in the speech, but a number of the bills, nearly half of them are rollovers from the Boris Johnson administration. And I guess the question in all of this is, where's the big, bold Rishi Sunak vision for the country that will turn on voters that have switched off from the Conservative Party? When I spoke to Conservative MPs last night, they were just feeling quite down about it all, saying that the sum of the parts doesn't add up to the rhetoric that he's saying about long-term vision for Britain. But I think we also have to put this into the context of, we are going to get an autumn statement later in the month, and that could be the moment where a Prime Minister can actually lay down policies that have a more immediate impact for voters that at the moment have looked away from the Conservatives and are looking at Labour.
Well, we'll be having a look to see if Beth's test is met. Is it going to be enough to change the dial at all as we get more detail on that? Andrew, I think lots of people watching this will find the whole thing a bit bizarre, that you've got the King there reading out to the cameras, his words, but they're not really his words, are they?
No, we live in a constitutional monarchy, which means while we have a hereditary head of state, a queen or king as we have now, they reign but they don't rule, and it's the government accountable to the electorate which rules, so to speak. However, this is the way we like to do things in this country. We like the pomp, we like the ceremony. It's an important part of the way we organise our society, whatever you may feel about it. And the King will be reading out the legislative programme of the government, but it won't be his personal agenda, it will be the agenda of the government.
Yeah, really important to remember that. It'll be kind of a neutral tone, won't it? That's what we often expect from the King, to show that he has no view on his words that are coming out of his mouth. Thank you both. We'll have lots more from you as this special programme rolls on. But I want to talk a bit about the detail of the speech now, because it's thought that much of the speech is going to be focusing on law and order, with the Conservatives keen to re-establish their credentials as tough on crime. So what can we expect? Existing plans, such as compelling defendants to attend their sentencing hearing, will be finalised. And we're also expecting measures to impose tougher sentences for serious crimes, including rape, as well as mandatory prison sentences for repeat offenders who commit burglary and theft. A scheme to rent space in foreign jails in an effort to ease prison overcrowding, that could also be on the cards today. Elsewhere, an annual system will be introduced to award new oil and gas licences. The government insists that will help the UK reach its net zero in a realistic way, but environmental campaigners aren't too happy about it. Less controversial are proposals to phase out smoking by raising the legal age that people can buy cigarettes by 1 year every year. Now, those plans are actually supported by Labour as well. And ministers have also confirmed there will be a bill ensuring that all new houses in England and Wales are sold as freehold properties, phasing out leaseholds. A bill to allow driverless cars to operate on the roads for the first time could also be among the measures announced today, as could a bill that would set up a football regulator and licensing system to scrutinise clubs' owners and their financial resources. Well, our political correspondent Amanda Acas is in Downing Street, from where the Prime Minister has now left from Parliament in the last few minutes. Amanda, what are we expecting to see?
Yes, so Rishi Sunak set off about 20 minutes ago from Downing Street to make that very short journey to Parliament. It was a much more low-key departure than we're expecting from the King and his full regalia. But it is a very important moment for Rishi Sunak. His first chance to hear the King reading out the legislative agenda of him and his ministers in that speech written by the government. And for him, it could well be the last time he's able to do that, because we're not really going to see another King's speech before he has to call the next general election by the end of January 2025. And therefore, what he needs to do with this speech is really try and capture the public's imagination a little bit, persuade them that he does have the ideas and the leadership to stay on as Prime Minister next time around, and try and reverse those really dire poll ratings that he's currently dealing with. And as such, the measures that are included later today, we're expecting to be pretty political, really trying to set out the dividing lines between the Conservatives and Labour, rather than being hugely meaty in terms of their policy content, because frankly there isn't really that much time to get all that much through Parliament anyway. So that's why we're really seeing this big focus on crime and justice, showing they're tough on law and order, making sure criminals attend court to get their sentences, to give longer sentences for rapists, to make sure that there are full life terms for the murderers who commit crimes with a sexual element, and also the oil and gas licensing that we heard a lot about yesterday, ensuring that those licenses are given out every year. That's really designed to create a bit of a gulf with them and Labour, who said that they will ban any future new licenses for fossil fuels in the North Sea. Labour say we don't need to do that, the government can do that anyway if they want to, but that's why it's really quite a political statement that the government are trying to make about their continuing commitment to homegrown fossil fuels, as it were. We're also expecting to hear more about the reform of leaseholds. That's something the government's been promising to do for a very long time. They still haven't done it. It has been a bit controversial, but that's trying to show that they understand some of the housing issues. But we'll hear much more at 11:25.
We certainly will. We'll bring that to you as soon as we have it as well. While Amanda was talking there about the politics, what we're expecting in policy terms to be in the King's speech, but of course there's a lot of pomp and ceremony before we get to that. We're looking at the sort of procession already starting down the Mall, because there's some pretty unique customs around this event. So we can go to our royal correspondent Laura Bundock, who's at Buckingham Palace for us. Laura, what are we expecting to see from there?
Well, already we've seen 2 carriages go past as part of this huge procession that ends with the monarch leaving the palace. A carriage for a crown, Queen Alexandra's state carriage carrying the imperial state crown. The king will leave here in a carriage himself. He will travel with a military escort, the household cavalry accompanying him, and when he arrives at Parliament, a 41-gun salute will be fired. This is the one day of the year, of course, the monarch is allowed inside Parliament, and as we've been saying, it's the first time in decades a king will have sat on the throne inside the House of Lords chamber. For added drama to this, as if there wasn't enough already, they will have dimmed the lights inside the chamber and they will be raised as the monarch enters the room. He will be wearing the ceremonial robes of estate, and that imperial state crown last on his head on coronation day. He will be wearing that as well. It is a big day for him as he sits down and reads the speech, and as we've been saying, words not written by him, he will say exactly what ministers want him to say. There is, though, usually a little bit of personal content in there, and it is customary for a new monarch to reflect on the life of the last monarch, and so to that I think we can expect some words from the king. But when it comes to reading the rest of the speech, particularly around any talk on green policy, I think we can expect a deadpan delivery from the king, because we know his views on this matter. He must remain politically neutral. He sits above politics as monarch, despite his campaigning side in the past, and he knows people will be watching for any sign of his own personal opinion. We will not see that today. I'm sure he will. This is not a chance for him to express any personal view. In fact, as monarch, he simply can't do that. But we will get, as I say, perhaps a small reflection on the life of the late Queen. The king has been here several times before, not just when he deputised the late Queen last year, but back to 1967 he's been accompanying her nearly every single year at the state opening of Parliament. He knows the routine here. This is, though, a big moment of theatre, isn't it? A big day for him, though, as monarch. And also accompanying him, not just the soldiers, which you can see behind me now, but protests too. Up to 500 were expected outside Parliament, anti-monarchy protesters who see this as an unnecessary ceremony. They're not agreeing with the institution itself. They're outside Parliament now. The king, no doubt, will see them as he enters Parliament a little bit later on.
I'm sure he will. It's all kind of part of the customs of the day, isn't it, Laura? Laura, thank you very much indeed. Laura Bundock there at Buckingham Palace, who is going to be keeping us across all of the departures this morning. Well, Laura was just there talking about some of the customs of today, and it feels like one of those customs, as she was saying, is the protesters. We do live in a democracy after all. The Sky's Ivor Bennett is with some of the anti-monarchy protesters outside the Houses of Parliament. Ivor, what's the atmosphere like where you are?
Well, it's very civilised, actually. The protest is underway. It's a very colourful protest. Laura was saying the King will probably see them. I'm sure he can't miss them because there are some very big yellow flags here saying, and placards as well, carrying the words, "Not my King," and occasionally the protesters who are gathered here are chanting those words as well as soldiers and bands march past, and I'm sure they will do when the King comes past in a few moments' time. Around 100 protesters are gathered here, up Whitehall here, and also around the corner on Parliament Square. Organisers say they were expecting 500. We're nowhere near that amount. As I say, more like about 100 protesters here, and they're here to call for an end to the monarchy. In their view, it's undemocratic. They say it is corrupt, secretive, and they've called the events in Parliament today a pantomime that celebrates the worst of our democracy. This is the group's first major anti-monarchy protest in London since the coronation in May, when 6 of the group's members were arrested by police and detained for more than 14 hours under sweeping new powers afforded by the Public Order Act. On that occasion, the group had been in discussion with the Met about holding a protest and agreeing details of a protest for the coronation. On that occasion, though, they weren't allowed to hold it, but here today, clearly they are. A lot of police are in attendance, but they're keeping their distance. And as I say, everything's pretty civilised at the moment. The group's chief executive, Graham Smith, he's in the crowd somewhere here this morning. I have spoken to him. According to him, the group's membership has actually swelled quite a lot this last year, doubled since the coronation, in his view, because of events of what happened and those arrests, which he claims are unlawful. But I think it's worth pointing out that despite the numbers here, they are clearly in a minority today.
Ivor, thank you very much indeed. Well, we can see Buckingham Palace there, some of the pomp, some of the pageantry already starting. Let's bring back in Beth Rigby, our political editor, and also Andrew Blick of King's College London. Andrew, what are we looking at now?
What we're looking at now is the beginnings of the ceremony where the monarch will process to Parliament, cutting down through Horsegate Guards along Whitehall, and then down to Parliament, when they'll go in through the Sovereign's entrance, where the Lord Great Chamberlain and the Earl Marshal, 2 hereditary posts, will be waiting to greet the King and take them into the actual Parliament building.
And of course, it wouldn't be a royal event without horses, without soldiers, members of the cavalry as well.
Exactly, horses, soldiers. We're going to hear some guns firing simultaneously in the Tower of London and Hyde Park, fired by the King's troop. And let's not forget that last night the yeomen of the guard searched the cellars of the Parliament building for any explosives because of a small incident that happened in 1605 involving Guy Fawkes that they don't want to see a repetition of, which was due to take place when James VI for Scotland, James I for England, was going to give his King's speech.
It really does feel like fireworks night and bonfire white. It's the kind of thing that could only happen in this country, surely. Beth, from a political perspective, how do you think Labour will be watching today?
Well, in this King's speech, as I was saying, there's quite a lot of bills that are carried over from the last session. So there's Boris Johnson legislation there, there's bits and pieces from the 2019 manifesto. But there is some Rishi Sunak attempts to draw dividing lines with Labour in all of this. So the minimum service levels around strikes, that's going to be, we expect, in the King's speech. And of course, the oil and gas licences to have a renewal automatically annually. Again, that's trying to find a dividing line with Labour. Now, if you speak to people in Number 10, what they say is this is a speech, a King's speech, which lays out Rishi Sunak's long-term vision for the country. We've heard him talk about this a lot ever since January, actually, when he set out his missions. And they say it's clear what his values are, what are Labour's. Now, when you ask Labour about it, and were you spooked about these dividing lines, I got from a couple of different people in the leader's office, quite robust responses last night. One person said to me they're not worried about these attacks, and they said if the Conservatives want to talk about their track record on energy bills, which is how they'll frame oil and gas, and strikes, which is how they'll frame minimum service levels, we'd be very happy with that, because these are 2 areas where they think that they're out of touch with the public. I mean, Sophie, NHS waiting lists, I was checking it this morning, they're, I think, at 7.7 million. They're going up not down. And I was looking at some research from the King's Fund that said they think regardless of what happens with strikes, they're still going to be going up because of the backlog and other complexities. And then another figure said to me, finding dividing lines for us, do the Conservatives seriously think that is how voters want to see the government run the country? And then they made the point that Sunak is meant to be the change. Where's the change? And if you go back to conference speech, and I was just looking at it again, do you remember he said, I am breaking with the status quo. Keir Starmer is the status quo. He's the old politician that did things that way. But then when you look at this speech and when you hear what Downing Street say about it, it's like this is all about continuation. There isn't any big, bold thing in this I can see at the moment. Let's see what he says. But I'm not expecting rabbits out of the hat that will signal change. So it's quite a confused message. And I think Labour are growing in confidence that they can see off these attacks.
Really difficult pitch to roll anyway, isn't it? Being the change candidate after 13 years of Conservative government as well. So we've been looking, we're just looking at more of the procession there around Buckingham Palace in the little roundabout ahead of Buckingham Palace. We've also been looking at pictures from the House of Lords, haven't we, where people are gathering to hear the King, Andrew?
Yes, so there'll be people gathering in the House of Lords itself. They will be wearing their full dress, their red and ermine. I think it's the only time they get to wear it, so it's a good opportunity for them. They like to dress up, I think. And then also the Royal Gallery, which is where the procession will actually go through before it gets into the House of Lords, will also be packed with various dignitaries.
You can see there Arlene Foster, for example, of the DUP, one of the people gathering on those red benches in the House of Lords. I guess the tickets will be pretty hot to see the King.
Yeah, I think it's an in-demand event in the calendar, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. Thank you both very much. We'll have lots more from Andrew and Beth in the coming hours. But just to focus again on the content of the speech, because lots of the speech is going to be focusing on law and order. The Conservatives keen to try and re-establish their credentials of tough on crime ahead of the next election. But of course, there has been that squeeze on prison places as well. Some of the existing plans, including compelling defendants to attend their sentencing hearing, will be finalised. We're also expecting measures to impose tougher sentences for serious crimes, including rape and mandatory prison sentences for repeat offenders who commit burglary and theft. Well, I'm really pleased to say that we're joined now by Farah Naz, whose niece, Zara Alina, was murdered in June 2022. Now, she's led the campaign for defendants to attend their sentencing hearing after Zara's murderer refused to do so. We can speak to her now. Farah, it's such a pleasure to have you on the programme today. I know the campaign that you've been doing over the last few months and years has been really quite astounding. Do you welcome the measures that we're expecting to be announced today?
Absolutely, yes, I do, and I and amongst other people who've been campaigning in this area for some time now, we're it's hard to say delighted, but embrace these new rulings and look forward to how they will be delivered. Of course, for us as a family, it's particularly jarring that a sexually motivated murder will be given a life sentence when, in our case, just a few days ago, the man who murdered Zara had his minimum sentence, actually reduced, and the sexual element was not regarded as an aggravating factor. So, and the sadistic element. So for us, if it was able, if it could be, if it could apply in our case, of course, we would be much more happier with today. But we're glad for the change. We're glad for the change for women. That rape is going to get harder sentences, that sexually motivated murders are going to be taken much more seriously, as they should. It will provide a deterrent for men such as the man who murdered Zara. It provides a strong message to women. We regard you, we regard your safety highly, and we want you to be safe. So as a family, we are very glad that something has come out of our campaigning, of our voice. We will continue to campaign to continue to bring more safety for women and for women's rights to safety on the streets, to be noted, to be highly regarded.
You say there, of course, that it's too late for Zara, but as you say, perhaps part of her legacy, that these changes are coming in. You also talked a bit about delivery, and I do wonder if you have any concerns about, it's easy to announce these things, but then it is in the delivery, isn't it? And the person who killed Zara didn't turn up for his sentencing. He walked out, I think, halfway through his appeal. And as you say, then his sentence was reduced on appeal. He won his appeal to reduce his sentence just a matter of days ago. Are you concerned that the delivery might not live up to the rhetoric here?
Well, a while ago I wouldn't have said that I would be concerned, but as services and systems, we see systemic errors all the time now in our story. I am concerned about the delivery, and I hope that it is carefully thought out, and I hope also that that it's sustainable. However this is going to be delivered, it needs to be sustainable. It's important that when felons are forced into the courtroom for their sentencing, that this is done respectfully, both for the staff, the workers, the prison officers, for probation officers, so that it doesn't place too much burden on them, that persuasive measures are used, and that the legal community are behind it. If people aren't behind it, then it won't be delivered so well. So it's important that everybody has buy-in. And also, I think there does need to be, certainly from my experience, our experience from the appeal hearing, there needs to be thought behind how we deliver and how we're consistent with the messages that we give to felons and the messages that we give to women.
Thank you very much indeed. Farah Naz there, who has, of course, been campaigning for changes in the law after the murder of her niece, Zara Alina. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we're going to take you to Buckingham Palace now, where we're expecting King Charles to leave in the next few moments and make his way to the House of Lords. You can just see the horses just poking their heads around there too. Let's have a little chat now, shall we, to Laura Bundock, who is at Buckingham Palace. Laura, what's happening?
So what you can see now is lining up the household cavalry who will be escorting the King and Queen and the royal carriage procession, which will then be making shortly its way from Buckingham Palace to Parliament. This is, as I've been saying, the one day of the year that the monarch is allowed inside Parliament this day, an important reminder of his constitutional role as a head of state to represent and deliver the government's speech. He doesn't, of course, write these words. These are the words of his government, his ministers, and he will say exactly what they tell him to say. But I think we can certainly expect some personal references from the King inside that speech. And there will be 2 outriders on grey horses accompanying the King and the Queen. They will be travelling in the Diamond Jubilee state coach.
Well, I think we can see that carriage now on our screens, making its way there through Buckingham Palace. Andrew, what are we looking at now?
Well, we're looking at the beginnings of a procession which is bringing the person who is in a sense, a part of Parliament whose authorisation is needed for bills before they become acts of Parliament, before they become law, and is in that sense part of the system, but as we've heard, doesn't have a personal role in actually making the decisions about what those laws are. But this is the one time at which this person, who is a part of Parliament, comes together with the two other parts of Parliament and tells them what the legislative programme of the government is. It's the one time where it happens, so in that sense it's very important.
And it's really a mix, isn't it, of the kind of constitutional politics, but also, I guess, the pageantry that we expect from the royal family. You can see there King Charles and Camilla in that carriage as they make their way to the Houses of Parliament. Laura, how are they travelling?
Well, the King inside the carriage isn't wearing his ceremonial robes yet. He's wearing his uniform as Admiral of the Fleet, the Royal Naval No. 1 dress. The Queen inside will also put on her robes of state. The King will inside Parliament put on the Imperial State Crown, which he last wore on Coronation Day. The crown just a few minutes earlier making its way in its own carriage to Parliament. And the Queen will be wearing the George IV diadem, which the late Queen wore on her head on several occasions. The King knows this route well, doesn't he? He accompanied the late Queen on several occasions when she delivered the Queen's speech, his first appearance in Parliament alongside her back in 1967. This is his first appearance, though, as King. And it was back in 1950 when George VI gave his last King's speech as King, too unwell to deliver the speech himself in 1951. The procession there making its way up the Mall. Also in the carriages are some of the Queen's companions. And in the third carriage, the Princess Royal in her role as Goldstick, a ceremonial role, the head bodyguard, if you like, of the King. Quite a sight in this autumn sunshine as these carriages leave Buckingham Palace, making their way along the Mall towards the Houses of Parliament.
Thank you, Laura. And Andrew, we did see a glimpse, didn't we, of the King and Queen inside their carriage. Queen Camilla wearing the George IV diadem previously worn by Elizabeth II. Quite a moment, really, and I think, for many of us, it's a day that we associate so much with the late Queen. How different do you think it will be?
Well, we've seen Charles give these speeches before, but obviously the big difference is this time he's in the job, he's the king, so there's a difference there. We will see them in the full regalia. As was said, they're not in it yet. They're going to go into the robing room in Parliament and emerge. I presume he will be wearing the crown. The Queen more recently didn't actually wear the crown. It's pretty heavy. It's, she was getting older. So we're going to see that. And this is a full dress event. It's for some years they've been more dressed down. For instance, immediately after general elections, it's sometimes harder to stage it. This will be the full event for a while. We've had COVID, we've had lots of interruptions. So it's the first time back. So for ceremony fans, this is going to be a good one.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because King Charles became monarch relatively late in life. We know a little bit about his views from when he was Prince of Wales. Do you think that is going to, mean that we're going to scrutinise his body language more, for example, when he's talking about some of the green issues on the agenda that Rishi Sunak's putting forward?
That's a very interesting point, and it comes back to this point about our constitutional monarchy. One thing the late Queen was very good at was keeping quiet about what her personal views were, and it's an important part of making our monarchy effective. They can't be seen to be partial. On the other hand, the Prince of Wales, as Prince of Wales, associate himself with views, some of them controversial, some of them one may agree with, some of them one may not agree with, but we do know or did know what he thought about things. Now, as time progressed, he did take steps back, and as he came to the throne, he said he would be stepping back from a number of his courses. his causes, but we can't unknow what we know about his views, and it does present an interesting case. Body language, we'll see, won't we? But I think body language or not, we do know where he stands on certain issues. For instance, I suspect we know where he is on fossil fuels, and we may hear something in the speech that relates to that. And that's interesting. So, yes, I think it's an interesting constitutional point there.
Because, Beth, we are expecting, aren't we, to hear about some green issues, I guess, in the speech today?
Yeah, I mean, look, what Rishi Sunak will partly be doing in this speech, if you think about it, is we are a year out from an election. You can see that there's a big emphasis on law and order in that speech. That is going to be a big theme of the election. Keir Starmer has also made that one of his priorities. And then the other big element, of course, is the economy. One cabinet minister saying to me at conference that they thought it was going to be a cost of living election. For Rishi Sunak, the issue of net zero, you and I have talked about it, picking up on environmental policies more broadly, and the win that they had in Uxbridge and that by-election over anger around ULEZ, which is the low emission zone, where if your car isn't compliant, you have to pay a charge. Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, rolling that out to outer London. The Conservatives seized on that as an opportunity, as this could be a dividing line where we can be on the side of, if you like, the common sense of people, as they would put it. Now, following on from this theme, yes, in the speech is going to be this element about oil and gas licences, because Keir Starmer is committed to keeping existing ones, but Labour want to phase out future ones because they've got the big green power agenda where they want to invest tens of billions of taxpayer money into green investment. And Rishi Sunak feels that this is an area where he can create a dividing line with Labour. But of course it's going to be uncomfortable for King Charles because he probably deeply disagrees with the policy. But of course his job in this moment is to relay the Prime Minister's wishes, and he has to be a neutral actor.
It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out later. Let's return to the procession, shall we? Can bring Laura Bundock back in. You can see them there making their way to the Houses of Parliament. And as Andrew was saying, that this is a big event for fans of pageantry and pomp, because we haven't had this for a little while because of COVID and other issues as well. Laura, what's happening?
Yeah, you can see this royal procession making its way across Horse Guards Parade, heading towards the Houses of Parliament. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we haven't had a state opening of Parliament on this scale for many years now. But of course, look at the scenes we can see in central London now, and it feels like we've seen this several times recently. And I think, that reflects the huge, constitutional moments of change we've had following the death of the late Queen, the state funeral. We've had a coronation, of course, Trooping the Colour as well. These big moments of pageantry, and this yet another sort of real reminder of that. This is all about the theatrics, isn't it? Right down to the fact that inside the chamber of the House of Lords, before the King enters the room, the lights are dimmed so that when he goes in, the lights go up, just to add to the drama of it all. And this is a tradition very much steeped in history, and is a ceremony that has been, we've seen for years and years. The King, as Prince of Wales, has taken part in this, not just last year when he deputised for the late Queen and delivered the speech, but it's back in 1967 that he first took part in this procession. Even reports that as a small boy, aged, just a few years old, he sat on a wall as his grandfather headed to Parliament to deliver the speech. So he knows the routine, he knows how it works. But I think for him personally, this will be another of those big moments. This is the first time as monarch that he will be delivering this speech. And I think his delivery will be as neutral, not flat, but deadpan, if you like, because as Prince of Wales, he had decades to sort of champion causes he cared about, the climate right up there with the top of those causes. And now he can no longer campaign in the same way, but we know he still cares about it. We see that in his engagements, even on the state visit to Kenya last week, very keen to emphasise the climate crisis and efforts being made to sort of find solutions with that. So I think when he looks at the speech and reads any lines about green policy, he will be well aware, everyone will be watching for the slightest twitch switch, if you like, any body language. So he will want that flat delivery to not give away any of his own personal opinion, because this is not about him expressing his personal views. This is about him reading the words of his government. There will be a tiny personal moment, though. It is traditional for a new monarch to reflect on the life of the previous. So there will be a little personal moment there. But when it comes to anything relating to policy, the king must sit above politics, and that's exactly what he will do today. He will, though, of course, pass protesters as well. There are around 100 gathered outside Parliament, anti-monarchy protesters gathering there. They will not like this sight, this spectacle, this ceremony at all today.
Yes, you can see there the King and Queen making their way along Whitehall. Just a matter of minutes now until they arrive in the Houses of Parliament. And we can tell you as well that apparently the Crown going into the robing room, which indicating that the arrival is pretty imminent. We're also getting a tweet that's been put out by the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, really ahead of him setting out the government's legislative programme. Rishi Sunak tweeting to say this government is taking the long-term decisions, there's that phrase that Beth was talking about earlier, to build a brighter future for people across the United Kingdom. This is what the King's Speech, the first of His Majesty's reign, will deliver. That tweet there from Rishi Sunak as the arrival of the King approaches, passing the cenotaph. There's such an important monument for so many people in Britain, across Britain. Andrew, let's bring you in now. We're approaching the moment.
We are, and as was just said, this is a ceremony which has long, long roots in history, although tweeting it beforehand is a slightly more recent innovation.
Yeah, I wonder if that's the first, one of the first times that's happened.
Yeah, well, indeed. But, this is partly of what we do. We invent traditions and we preserve traditions as well, and we add to them. The actual ceremony in this form really goes back to 1852. There was a great fire and the existing parliamentary building was burnt down in 1834. Then we got the rebuild, the building we know now. So there's lots of precedent going much back much further, but really the beginnings of the way it's done now go to 1854, 1852. But it is a very, very important traditional ceremony.
And I guess from the carriage to the crown to the robes, all of this is steeped in tradition.
It is steeped in tradition. We're going to see some important jewels. We're going to see the crown. I think we're also going to see the cap of maintenance and the great sword of state being carried in front of the monarch. Well, it's a good question. I think by tradition it's something that popes gave to monarchs, but it's a symbol of power. So I'm hoping we're going to see it.
That we want to look out for as well. You can see there the carriage moving along Parliament Square, bedecked in flags, all these rows, of course, closed to allow the full pageantry and pomp of the occasion. And who is it who's escorting the King and Queen, Andrew?
Well, when they actually get to the sovereign entrance, it will be two royal officials, the Lord Great Chamberlain and the Earl Marshal. They're both hereditary posts. The Earl Marshal is the Duke of Norfolk, who is the most senior non-royal in the kingdom, and it goes down through their family. He's actually a relative of Catherine Howard, fifth wife of Henry VIII. And then we have Lord Carrington, who I believe is the Lord Great Chamberlain, another hereditary post that's actually split between different families. And whenever a monarch passes away, as happened last year with the late Queen, it passes on to one of the other families. They've got it at the moment, and they're responsible for handling things for the monarch. Then they hand over to some of the parliamentary people as well.
Let's bring Laura in, shall we? We can see the King and Queen approaching Parliament, approaching Westminster. The carriage being pulled by those absolutely resplendent white horses. Laura, what are the King and Queen wearing today?
I didn't quite catch you there, Sophie, but you can see there the King in his carriage. It's a Diamond Jubilee state coach, this one. He could actually have travelled in the gold state coach, but it's known to be incredibly uncomfortable, which is why I'm sure he opted for this one instead, much more modern inside. He will be taken up to the Sovereign's entrance at the Palace of Westminster, and that's where he will be received, and then make his way into the royal robing room. Both the King and Queen will put on the robes of state, and the King will then place on his head the imperial state crown. As I say, the crown we last saw at the coronation, last worn by him on that day. Queen doesn't wear a crown, but she will wear a state diadem, and then they will make their way towards and from the sovereign's staircase into the royal gallery. And like I say, that moment of drama, the lights are dimmed, then they go back up again before he sits on the throne. Remember last year when he delivered the Queen's speech, because he wasn't king and hadn't been crowned, he didn't wear the crown at that point. The crown was next to him, a very symbolic moment, really, a symbol of the crown and its role within the two houses. But this time, of course, as monarch, he sits on the throne and he will deliver the speech of his government, very much written by his government. His ministers will have written the words, but it is customary for a new monarch to say something about the life of the last, and I think we can expect that today. But it will be this deadpan delivery we can expect from the king. It's the one day of the year that he's actually allowed inside Parliament. Never will go inside, but today he will go inside for this sort of theatrical moment, if you like.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you landed in the UK with no experience of this, you would perhaps wonder what was going on. You can hear now the 41 gun salute starting from Green Park behind me. That announces that the sovereign, the king, has arrived at Parliament.
The gun salute there that Laura was talking about, announcing the king arriving in Parliament. And he was right on time, 11:15. I mean, these things, I guess, are absolutely precise, aren't they?
You have to get it right, and apparently if he walks too early into the chamber, there'll be a fanfare and he may get the bugles in his ear, and it's not very pleasant. So everything has to be very carefully figured out like that.
And you can see there the members of the House of Lords are waiting to hear the king as that gun salute rings out from Green Park, signalling that the King and Queen are arriving in Parliament ahead of the King's speech. And Andrew, there is so much history around monarchs being allowed to enter Parliament anyway, isn't there?
Yes, and I think we're going to see in a minute the very famous ceremony where Black Rod, Sarah Clark, the holder of Black Rod, who's responsible for communications between the monarch and Parliament, is sent to the House of Commons to summon the MPs, and in recognition of certain problems that an earlier Charles had with Parliament, when Charles I, who tried to arrest MPs, the door to the entrance to the chamber of the House of Commons will be slammed in the face of Black Rod, and Black Rod will have to knock 3 times with the black rod from which the job title was derived, and then be let in to summon the members. So the symbol is the House of Commons is independent. It's not subject to the monarch. It's its own body. Then they will come, and they do it in they make a point of doing it informally. They will go on. We'll see the procession of the Sergeant at Arms, the Prime Minister, the Speaker of the House of Commons, etc., from the Commons to the Lords to hear the speech.
And I mean, that's one of, as a political watchers, that's one of our favourite bits, because you get to watch prime ministers and leaders of the opposition and chancellors and shadow chancellors process together. And I remember one year Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn, and Boris Johnson was sort of scratching his head and trying to make conversation, and Jeremy Corbyn was having absolutely none of it. So it's always interesting for us to see sort of how well these people do or don't get on.
Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer probably, you can imagine them making some polite chat, right?
They might make some polite chit-chat, but maybe things are getting a bit rougher between them now, huh?
Yeah, it's a bit more personal.
Bit more personal, the battle lines are being drawn. I mean, interestingly, I was thinking about one thing about the tougher sentence and stuff, where this is a Rishi Sunak initiative rather than a hangover from other administrations about the tougher sentence of life means life. And it did occur to me that in terms of political positioning, Tory sources just pointed out to me that when Keir Starmer was Director of Public Prosecutions, he said that it doesn't always, let me find the exact words, he said at the time he didn't think all murders should be a life sentence. So you can see within this speech, it might not be obvious now, but as we go into an election, what are these divides that the Prime Minister is drawing and kind of stacking up potential attack lines, personal and policy-wise, on Labour? It's actually fascinating.
Yeah, the fallout from this, I think, will be quite interesting to see how Labour react to it as well. So just to update you, if you are just switching us on now, the carriage with King Charles and Queen Camilla has arrived at Westminster after making its way from Buckingham Palace along Whitehall. He used the sovereign entrance to enter Parliament, reserved for the monarch, before processing to the throne of the House of Lords. And this is the scene now in Members' Lobby, and this is Central Lobby now. You can see there people gathering inside the Houses of Parliament, ready to greet the arrival of the monarch, which will be any moment, we expect. Again, we'll talk about the hot ticket in the House of Lords. Well, a kind of front row seats in the Members' Lobby or in Westminster Hall, I would imagine, as well, a pretty hot ticket.
Yeah, I think in demand, and interesting to see another historic place in Central Lobby where the term to lobby apparently originates from that place, because it's where the lobbying originally took place.
And by lobbying, of course, we mean people effectively hustling, right? So waiting to grab an MP, to try and have a whisper in their ear, to try and change government policy.
Indeed, and maybe there'll be some of that going on right now, who knows?
Yeah, but maybe a couple of people trying to do that now. Although I guess King Charles himself, completely independent, as we'd expect.
Yeah, it's too late to lobby anything into this speech, I think.
But perhaps future ones.
Indeed.
So who are the people that we are expecting to be there? Is that staff members? Is it MPs? Who are we looking at?
We're looking at, I suppose, staff members. We have various dignitaries. We'll have senior judges will be there, foreign ambassadors, high commissioners, all range of things across the different chambers where it will be taking place. But I should imagine there we're looking at maybe staff members, relatives of staff members. They look quite young, don't they, some of them?
Yeah, they do. I'd imagine that these are probably people working for MPs. Looking at Members' Lobby now, you can see MPs gathering there. A couple, you can see Kath McKinnell there, the Labour Party. You can see Michael Ellis of the Conservative Party there on the front row, trying to pick a couple of people out. Kevin Brennan there as well, of the Labour Party. So again, it's MPs there. It's a big moment for people in Parliament, as Beth was saying. If you are a Westminster watcher, then this moment, the kind of official opening of Parliament by King Charles III, the first by a king in 70 years. It's quite a moment.
Yeah, I also think that it's another, in terms of the symbolism of the day, of course it's a massive occasion for Parliament where a government sets out a mission, but today this is another sort of staging post, isn't it, on the handover of, or the shift from the Elizabethan age, which we all grew up in and I knew all my life, to the Carolean age of Prince Charles. So it's a massive moment in our history, isn't it?
It does feel
It does feel, it almost feels more important as a regal moment today than as a political moment.
I think that's right. And even the word the King's Speech, I kind of think of the film, when you hear it, because we've been so used to covering Queen's speeches in the past. It does feel like such a line in the sand.
You can see why people want to get in the room and want to line up in the chamber to be part of this piece of history.
It's a big first moment in the job, isn't it, I should imagine.
And I guess for King Charles as well, something that he will have grown up watching, knowing that at one stage in his life, he could be the person sitting on the chair, opening Parliament, delivering the words of the Prime Minister as monarch. And this is the year that's finally happening.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to know, do they rehearse, do they run through? Presumably he must try somewhere, and he must know what's in it. How soon are they told?
Yeah, it'll be. Yeah, there must, like you say, the rehearsals for these kind of things from the perspective of the speech, and this is something that Number 10 and the government would have been crafting for many weeks now, but also the pageantry of it too. We're looking at pictures there of both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And what is the role of the two different chambers today, Andrew?
Well, the House of Lords is the obviously the venue for the actual speech, and the House of Commons, as we were talking about.
We can see there the
Yeah.
Speaker, just to bring you in there, Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker. What are we looking at, Andrew?
Well, we're looking at the Sergeant-at-Arms walking in front of the Speaker. So the Sergeant-at-Arms is, in theory, the kind of head of security for Parliament, and the mace is I suppose, their weapon, and that's what they're carrying on their shoulder.
And what's the history of the mace?
Well, I presume it's a medieval weapon that was once actually used for the actual purposes for which, of defence, and now I presume they've got other security devices as well. Now it's more of a ceremonial item. But yeah, again, very important part of the whole ceremony. And here we have the Lord Speaker here.
And you can see him entering the chamber there.
The chamber with the train behind him, I think. We also see the Lord Chancellor will be involved in this.
And Beth, it will be a historic moment for the Speaker as well. The fact that it is as you were saying, such a moment with the King's speech, the first King's speech in 70 years, and it is for Lindsay Hoyle, who is...
And Sir Lindsay Hoyle has had, he was the Speaker when the Queen died, so he has had a very ceremonial role over the past year. So I imagine that this will be, a very significant moment for him too.
Well, this is the House of Lords that we are now looking at here. Absolutely packed to the rafters. You could hardly imagine another person managing to squeeze into that room. As you can see there, the pictures of the Houses of Parliament with MPs lining up, waiting to see the arrival of the King, that we're expecting to be pretty imminent. Andrew, what are we expecting to be happening now behind closed doors?
The robing, I presume, is taking place in the robing room. We don't get to see that. And then they will emerge in the robes of state, I presume, with the crown on. And then they will process through the Royal Gallery at the House of Lords, which then leads them into the Chamber of the House of Lords. The King will then, I think there'll be a fanfare, but then, as we've heard, the lights will go down. Then the King will settle down in the throne, and then I think we'll ask one of his officials to signal to Black Rod to go and summon the Commons, at which point the ceremony we were talking about, where the door closes and the knocking takes place, will happen. So I think that's what we're going to see. And the Lord Chancellor will give the speech to the King.
So, as Andrew was saying, what we're expecting to happen next, but also what we think is probably going on right now, is the King putting on his crown and his ceremonial robes ahead of making the all-important King's speech, where he'll be setting out the government's legislative programme for the year ahead. The robing room is the place where the King will put on those ceremonial robes. It's a room effectively next door to the House of Lords chamber. And of course, a few moments ago, around 11:15, was when the King and Queen entered the Houses of Parliament. The Queen getting out of that carriage first, followed by the King after they made their way over from Buckingham Palace along Whitehall, and then entering Parliament through the Sovereign's entrance, which is reserved for the monarch. You're looking now at live pictures from the House of Lords, where members are awaiting the arrival of the King. It's his first King's speech as monarch. He, of course, stepped in for his mother, the late Queen, in May 2022, delivering the speech on behalf of his mother. But, of course, that was as Prince of Wales. This is the first time that King Charles III will be delivering the King's speech, the first King's speech for around 70 years, a real moment in history that we are about to witness.
It's interesting as well, Sophie, last night Insiders and Number 10 said in terms of the King's speech that this won't be a wow moment. There won't be a shiny new policy that will somehow dazzle us all. But how dazzling is that in terms of a wow moment, just ceremonially, of the traditions of this country that you have handover from a queen to a king, and this all continues on.
And we're looking there at live pictures from the House of Lords, where we can see some people entering the chamber. Andrew, what's happening?
Looks to me like they're getting ready for the actual imminent arrival. I think we can expect the procession to start very soon. And as was said, whatever's in the speech, they're definitely putting on a good show for us. So I think we can expect that all to be happening as we would expect.
And Somnadra, I don't know if this is right. You'll have to help me because I am definitely a novice on this. But the Queen and the King will both.
Here they are. They're arriving. You can see there King Charles III entering the House of Lords, wearing his ceremonial robes. And Andrew, everything that he wears, everything that the Queen is wearing, carefully chosen according to tradition.
Yeah, very much in accordance with the tradition. It would have been put on in the robing room, all carefully worked out, especially for the occasion. And the imperial state crown we can see there, of enormously valuable item, as many of the other items on display. And I think we can see the great sword of state there. But it's all been worked out very carefully, and this will have all been carefully stage managed. We can be sure about that.
Yeah, the ceremonial mace placed in the House of Commons.
My lords, pray be seated.
And let's listen.
That's the signal's gone to Black Lord.
Black Rod!
Black Rod entering the House of Commons there. Andrew, just explain what's happening.
Black Rod is going to be summoning the MPs to attend the speech. And they are somewhat putting on a show of somewhat reluctance, will come and attend the speech to emphasise that they're doing it because they're choosing to do it rather than just because the monarch's telling them what to do. It's an important part, again, of our constitutional monarchy. There goes the Sergeant at Arms, I believe, with the mace, followed by the Speaker. See, look, they're joking around. That's the interesting bit. They make a point of joking around. And some MPs who are known for being Republicans will make slightly cheeky comments at times. Has been known to happen.
Dennis Skinner, of course,
Indeed,
famously used to make a point of that, didn't he?
Yes, exactly. That was part of his routine, and much appreciated. So it's all part of the show. As you can see, they're walking not particularly formal way. Then we have the Speaker, followed by the Clerk of the House of Commons, I think, will be in that procession. And there's Black Rod, Sarah Clarke, and then the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, and various other MPs following behind them.
And of course, we saw that incredible moment when the door of the House of Commons slammed in Black Rod's face to symbolise the Commons' independence from the Crown. Really important part, as you say, Andrew, of the ceremony, and of really showing the separation between the Crown and the legislative body.
There you can see Keir Starmer and the Prime Minister. They look like they're having a nice chat.
Bit of laughter there.
We'll get some a speech expert on that later, Sophie, shall we?
Yeah, we should.
Body language expert, maybe.
I always love to know what they are talking about in these. They probably work it out before, don't they? Think like, oh, that moment, I'm going to have to say something, so I look like I'm, not too grumpy. I
think chit-chat is the order of the day going through there, isn't it?
Talking about each other's kids, maybe, or, how the wife's doing. We can see there people from the House of Commons filing through into the House of Lords, ready to listen to King Charles setting out the government's legislative programme for the year ahead. Lots of MPs there from both benches filing through. And as Andrew was saying, they try and do it in an informal way, is how you put it, to try and show that they're doing it out of their own volition. They're not being ordered to do it by the king.
Yeah, almost making a show out of not making a show, if that makes sense.
Alex Chalk then.
That's Alex Chalk, the Lord Chancellor, I believe, delivering the speech to the monarch. Kneeling.
And of course, lots in his department in the King's speech we're expecting to hear in just a few moments' time.
My Lords and members of the House of Commons, it is mindful of the legacy of service and devotion to this country set by my beloved mother, the late Queen, that I deliver this, the first King's speech in over 70 years. The impact of COVID and the war in Ukraine have created significant long-term challenges for the United Kingdom. That is why my government's priority is to make the difficult but necessary long-term decisions to change this country for the better. My minister's focus is on increasing economic growth and safeguarding the health and security of the British people for generations to come. My government will continue to take action to bring down inflation, to ease the cost of living for families, and help businesses fund new jobs and investment. My ministers will support the Bank of England to return inflation to target by taking responsible decisions on spending and borrowing. These decisions will help household finances, reduce public sector debt, and safeguard the financial security of the country. Legislation will be introduced to strengthen the United Kingdom's energy security and reduce reliance on volatile international energy markets and hostile foreign regimes. This bill will support the future licensing of new oil and gas fields, helping the country to transition to net zero by 2050 without adding undue burdens on households. Alongside this, my ministers will seek to attract record levels of investment in renewable energy sources and reform grid connections, building on the United Kingdom's track record of decarbonising faster than other G7 economies. My government will invest in Network North to deliver faster and more reliable journeys between and within the cities and towns of the North and Midlands, prioritising improving the journeys that people make most often. My ministers will strengthen education for the long term. Steps will be taken to ensure young people have the knowledge and skills to succeed through the introduction of the Advanced British Standard that will bring technical and academic routes into a single qualification. Proposals will be implemented to reduce the number of young people studying poor quality university degrees and increase the number undertaking high quality apprenticeships. My ministers will take steps to make the economy more competitive, taking advantage of freedoms afforded by the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union. A bill will be brought forward to promote trade and investment with economies in the fastest growing region in the world. My ministers will continue to negotiate trade agreements with dynamic economies, delivering jobs and growth in the United Kingdom. My ministers will introduce new legal frameworks to support the safe commercial development of emerging industries, such as self-driving vehicles, introduce new competition rules for digital markets, and encourage innovation in technologies such as machine learning. Legislation will be brought forward to support the creative industries and protect public interest journalism. Proposals will be published to reform welfare and support more people into work. My government will promote the integrity of the Union and strengthen the social fabric of the United Kingdom. Working with NHS England, my government will deliver its plans to cut waiting lists and transform the long-term workforce of the National Health Service. This will include delivering on the NHS Workforce Plan, the first long-term plan to train the doctors and nurses the country needs, and minimum service levels to prevent strikes from undermining patient safety. Record levels of investment are expanding and transforming mental health services to ensure more people can access the support they need. My government will introduce legislation to create a smoke-free generation by restricting the sale of tobacco so that children currently aged 14 or younger can never be sold cigarettes, and restricting the sale and marketing of e-cigarettes to children. My ministers will bring forward a bill to reform the housing market by making it cheaper and easier for leaseholders to purchase their freehold and tackling the exploitation of millions of homeowners through punitive service charges. Renters will benefit from stronger security of tenure and better value, while landlords will benefit from reforms to provide certainty that they can regain their properties when needed. My government will deliver a long-term plan to regenerate towns and put local people in control of their future. Legislation will be brought forward to safeguard the future of football clubs for the benefit of communities and fans. A bill will be introduced to deal with the scourge of unlicensed pedicabs in London. My government is committed to tackling anti-Semitism and ensuring that the Holocaust is never forgotten. A bill will progress the construction of a National Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre in Victoria Tower Gardens. My government will act to keep communities safe from crime, antisocial behaviour, terrorism and illegal migration. A bill will be brought forward to ensure tougher sentences for the most serious offenders and increase the confidence of victims. My ministers will introduce legislation to empower police forces and the criminal justice system to prevent new or complex crimes, such as digital-enabled crime and child sexual abuse, including grooming. At a time when threats to national security are changing rapidly due to new technology, my ministers will give the security and intelligence services the powers they need and will strengthen independent judicial oversight. Legislation will be introduced to protect public premises from terrorism in light of the Manchester Arena attack. My government will deliver on the Illegal Migration Act passed earlier this year and on international agreements to stop dangerous and illegal channel crossings and ensure it is the government, not criminal gangs, who decides who comes to this country. My government will continue to champion security around the world, to invest in our gallant armed forces, and to support veterans to whom so much is owed. My ministers will work closely with international partners to support Ukraine, strengthen NATO, and address the most pressing security challenges. This includes the consequences of the barbaric acts of terrorism against the people of Israel, facilitating humanitarian support into Gaza, and supporting the cause of peace and stability in the Middle East. My government will continue to lead action on tackling climate change and biodiversity loss, support developing countries with their energy transition, and hold other countries to their environmental commitments. The United Kingdom will continue to lead international discussions to ensure that artificial intelligence is developed safely. My government will host the Global Investment Summit, the European Political Community, and the Energy Conference, leading global conversations on the United Kingdom's most pressing challenges. I look forward to welcoming His Excellency the President of the Republic of Korea and Mrs. Kim Keon-hee for a state visit later this month. My government will, in all respects, seek to make long-term decisions in the interests of future generations. My ministers will address inflation and the drivers of low growth over demands for greater spending or borrowing. My ministers will put the security of communities and the nation ahead of the rights of those who endanger it. By taking these long-term decisions, my government will change this country and build a better future. Members of the House of Commons, estimates for the public services will be laid before you. My Lords and members of the House of Commons, other measures will be laid before you. I pray that the blessing of Almighty God may rest upon your counsels.
And that concludes the first King's speech for 70 years. King Charles beginning with paying tribute to his late mother, the Queen, the mindful of the legacy of service and devotion to this country set by my beloved mother, the late Queen. He said that I deliver this, the first King's speech in over 70 years. 21 bills in total announced, from new oil and gas licensing to a tobacco bill that means those 14 years and younger will never be able to buy cigarettes, a renters bill to help leaseholders, and of course the sentencing bill to increase sentencing for the most serious of offences. And with that, the King now departing from the House of Lords. Let's bring Andrew back in at this point, shall we? What is the King doing now, making his way back to Buckingham Palace?
Yeah, he'll be going back to the palace. He's done his bit of the job. Now it's over to the politicians. It was as we expected, a dispassionate but competent delivery of the speech. Now the politicians have to sell it or criticise it, so it'll be over to them for the next few days.
And with that, over to Beth. Let's bring in Beth Rigby, shall we? It was a studiously neutral tone, wasn't it? That kind of dispassionate tone from the King to show he has no view whatsoever on his announcements.
But isn't it always so strange when you hear the words of a Prime Minister spoken by the monarch? And I haven't counted it yet, so I haven't had enough time, but, you know, I did hear quite a lot of long long-term decision-making in there. So he kicked off by saying, it's my government's priority to make difficult but necessary long-term decisions to change the country for the better. And he concluded by saying, my government seeks to make long-term decisions in the interests of future generations. And so Rishi Sunak there, like setting out his stall in this King's Speech. You can see the two gents going back there, because now the politicians will begin to debate. But, 21 bills, 3 themes, as number 10 would put it: growing the economy, strengthening society, law and order. Some of the most eye-catching bills within that, you had the trade bill for growing the economy, strengthening society, the Prime Minister's legislation on tobacco products, clamping down on antisocial behaviour, and law and order. Life means life. Let's see how that emerges in a general election campaign, because for all of the long-term decision-making, this is a political sharpening here that we are also seeing, in which the Prime Minister is also laying down bills and pieces of legislation where he thinks he can draw dividing lines with Labour. The final thought of it is that he talked a lot, the King, about long-term decision-making. That's what the Prime Minister wants to sell here. But does the sum of the parts of this speech really add up to that? Many MPs would say, not really, it doesn't shift the dial.
Lots more analysis on that in the hours ahead. So the ceremonial mace back now in the House of Commons, and MPs filing back through. I love the fact they kind of pair up Conservative and Labour MPs. I think my favourite combination that I spotted was Matt Hancock and Jacob Rees-Mogg. I'd have loved to have heard that conversation. Perhaps even more so than the Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer
Maybe they were discussing celebrity television.
Oh yeah, that's true. You can imagine maybe a bit of Who Dares Wins or something on there. And of course, King Charles there, getting back inside the carriage with the Queen Camilla, ready to make that journey back to Buckingham Palace. Let's bring in our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, shall we? We can see some of the MPs there filing back into the House of Commons. They'll be digesting the King's speech. Was there anything in there that you thought might move the dial?
Well, I've been looking at the sort of detail of what we've been talking about. 21 different measures in this King's speech. One of them is a draft bill, so we can pretty much discount that as having any chance of actually becoming law before the likely general election in a year's time. So 20 other measures. 6 of them that I can identify were already in train. So, and there's another one missing. We were told there were going to be 7 carryover bills. Now there are 16. But essentially, criminal justice on the one hand, smoking on the other, and housing. They're the 3 big areas that we're looking at, and I think a little bit later, Sophie, we're going to be digging right down into the detail of what's happened and what we've been told, but also, fascinatingly, what's not in there, because in some ways that tells as big a political story as what we've just heard from the King about this government. Yeah,
it will certainly be interesting to dig down into the detail and sort of digest the elements of the King's speech, what's there and what isn't there as well. We're still looking at those pictures of MPs leaving the House of Lords and re-entering the House of Commons. Let's bring Laura Bundock in, shall we, who is at Buckingham Palace for us. And Laura, you'll be awaiting the re-arrival, should we say, of King Charles and Queen Camilla.
That's right. It was with the grand royal procession that they made their way to the Houses of Parliament. They will now be making that journey in reverse. It was interesting listening, I think, to the start of the speech. We were expecting it, weren't we? A new monarch tends to traditionally make reference to the last, and the King at the start of the King's speech there talking about the legacy of service and devotion to the country that his mother, his beloved mother, had showed. So a touching reference there, as we had expected, and following the custom that monarchs before him have set as he made his first speech at the state opening of Parliament as monarch. He delivered the speech deputising for his mother last year, but this was his moment. He was sat there in the robe of state, the Queen also wearing her robe of state. but he had the imperial state crown on his head. And I feel it is a moment, it's an image, isn't it? We feel we've seen a lot of recently, you know, the coronation, the crowns, all the ceremony, all that pomp. But this is an important moment in the calendar, if you like, of the monarch, and an important moment that highlights his constitutional role as king. And I think his delivery, very, very neutral in tone, wasn't it? There was no hint whatsoever of any personal opinion. I was reminded, actually, the last time we saw the king address a huge gathering of politicians was at the French Senate, and he spoke with great passion about the climate, calling for an entente of sustainability. These, though, the words of his government given to him by ministers, he read their words, he delivered their message. There was no expression of any personal view there whatsoever. He knew full well everyone will be watching him for that slightest twitch that might reflect his opinion. None of that today, though. This very much him reading the words of his government.
Right, Laura, absolutely not a glimmer of emphasis or anything that would suggest a personal view from the king. I was particularly listening and watching him when he read out this line: "This bill will support the future licensing of new oil and gas fields, helping the country to transition to net zero by 2050 without adding undue burdens on households." Beth, I do wonder what the kind of long-term environmentalist King Charles was thinking as he read out that line.
Yeah, probably not a comfortable line for him to have to read out, but I'm sure that the Queen, in her many, many decades of doing these speeches, probably felt the same. We will never know, and nor should we, really, because, of course, he is there to execute the Prime Minister's agenda. But I do think the oil and gas legislation is one of the most eye-catching of bills within this, not least because, as we were discussing, the Conservative Party really think that this is a way to put pressure on Labour when it comes to net zero policies, and then, of course, just broader environmental policies. If you look at what Number 10 would say, they would argue that they are taking a common sense approach to the greening of our economy, and they want to box Labour in and make it uncomfortable for them. Labour seem comfortable with having the argument. As I was saying earlier, if you talk to people around Keir Starmer, he says the public aren't interested, or they would say the public aren't interested in creating dividing lines. They want to see how the country is governed. And as one said to me, where's the change in this speech? That was their argument. But I'm sure that Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak are about to kind of hammer this out at the dispatch box a bit later.
Yeah, we'll see the dividing lines there. But as Beth was saying, 21 bills in the speech today, but not an awful lot of surprises. It is really a moment of ceremony when the King sets out the government's legislative programme. Many of the bills, of course, that we already know about. It may be Jeremy Hunt's autumn statement later this month, which will be more of a moment, I guess, in setting the political weather. But certainly from a ceremonial point of view, this was quite a moment. The first King's speech in 70 years. And Andrew, what will be happening now? We can see the carriage there waiting for the King and the Queen outside the Houses of Parliament. Are we assuming he's in the robing room?
I presume they're in the robing room, derobing, and they'll come back and go back home, having done put in their shift for the day. And as we say, over to politicians, and it comes with the job. You have to say things in this job perhaps you don't agree with, I presume, and maybe that's what he's just done. But I thought he did it very well.
And Sam, just to bring in Sam, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, was there anything that stood out to you in the speech today, or was this really business as usual, what we were expecting?
I think this is a realism about this King's speech, a realism that there isn't a huge amount of time to get the legislation that the King promised actually down on the statute books. Passing laws is a lengthy process. There's a realism when you look at the fine detail about the limits of what they've been able to do. I mean, some things are missing altogether. We've been talking for months about banning conversion therapy. There's nothing in that list today on that. Very important reforms to do with rail have been downgraded to a draft bill. So there's a lot of stuff missing. There were hopes in Downing Street they might be able to do some other big environmental reforms to actually enact some of that stuff, to get house building moving by scrapping an EU regulation that means that you can't build houses if the rivers are too polluted, but they just I think that they've got the parliamentary strength to do that, and all of that important.
It's interesting when you're saying that about what isn't in there. I guess, is that a sign of weakness, would you say, from the Prime Minister?
So I think it's each different omission tells its own story. I think on the trans conversion therapy, that's a story of Tory splits. On the environmental measures, that's a story of parliamentary strength or lack of it. And some of the other stuff is just a question of priority. I think the King's speech is not really an exercise in headlines. It's an exercise in telling you where the power really lies at the moment.
I mean, interestingly as well, Sam, I was talking to a former cabinet minister about this yesterday, about what was missing from the speech, and there is a chunk of backbenchers that really thinks that planning reform and housing, which is something that Keir Starmer seized on at the Labour Party conference, saying I will take on the NIMBYs, is something that this Prime Minister should have done if he wanted to be bold, if he wanted to appeal to younger voters. They say look to what's happened in Canada with the Conservatives there and the way in which they have won back younger voters. But again, politically, this is a difficult thing to land, and it's been put into the too hard to do box, as many of the other pieces of legislation Sam was referring to have as well. And it does seem like it's a Prime Minister that's running out of time in terms of you can't get much through before an election, but also running out of political space, because he became leader without a mandate from the grassroots, the Conservative Party, and he hasn't got a mandate from the public, and he's got dozens of very restive backbenchers boxing him in.
That's right. You look at the detail of the housing bill, and I think in a moment we're going to start going through the documents in quite some fine detail, and you look at proposals to deal with ground rent on existing properties, and all of that is being downgraded to a consultation with an admission in the official documents that it may or may not be able to be decided by the time that law has passed.
And let's get real, this is likely to be the final King's speech before an election. To be. There's not that much parliamentary time to get this stuff.
No, I mean, we were talking about this earlier, all of us, weren't we, that it is a hard moment to land anyway. It's an abstract thing, isn't it? It is a kind of moment where for Parliament and Westminster, a Prime Minister sets out mission. That's not necessarily very easy to connect with the public, but in this case of this Prime Minister, he hasn't got many moments or much time to connect with the public. And so you could make the argument of, could he have held something back from conference or put something into this which caught the imagination and captured headlines about something that he was doing that was radical, that did signal that he was the change candidate, which is kind of the rhetoric from the conference, but it just doesn't seem to have trickled through to this speech. And I can't personally see anything in it that I think will shift the dial or make voters that have tuned out from the Conservative Party to look at this and go, I'll give that guy another look. So now we look to the autumn statement to see if this is a moment for a reset.
What's fascinating is that back in August, late August, I was being told this is one of the big four moments alongside the autumn. And then I listened to you last night, Beth, with Downing Street basically saying, steady as she goes, there's not going to be a lot. I wonder, is that actually a sign that the Downing Street that we've got is not very experienced? There are a bunch of people, it's not just Rishi Sunak's first King's speech, it's that whole team's. And I think they sometimes think of things as big moments, and then reality starts to dawn, and that's why you end up with what we've got today.
Is the King's speech one of those moments that it's difficult to make much political gain out of, simply because of the fact it's delivered by the King, right? It has to be neutral. It would be, I guess, would it be difficult to have a big political moment? I'm just going to just pause myself there because we are now seeing the King and Queen entering the carriage. And there's the King getting in as well after derobing, taking off those ceremonial robes and getting back into the carriage. King Charles and Queen Camilla, after delivering the first King's Speech in 70 years, his first King's Speech as monarch. And Andrew, they'll now be making their way back to Buckingham Palace.
Yes, I presume they'll be going back the same way they came, so along Whitehall, through Horse Guards Parade and onto the Mall and along there, which was the route they traditionally followed to come to the speech as well.
And you can see the Royal Standard there being lowered outside Big Ben. What's the significance of that?
Well, again, because this is the only day when the monarch can actually enter Parliament and take part in a parliamentary proceeding. The hoisting of the Royal Standard signifies that. So it's gone back down again. The portcullis has come down and they can't come here for another however long.
And the carriage with the monarch inside now making its way in front of the Houses of Parliament, where, of course, there is that protest going on, Republican protest, almost part of the pageantry of the event. There's always a anti-monarchy protest going on. Ivor Bennett is there for us, and I guess the King will be able to see the people protesting, Ivor.
Yeah, he will, absolutely, because the protesters here from the group called Republic have stationed themselves in a very prominent position here, right on the corner of Whitehall and Parliament Square, opposite Parliament. And there's a group of about 100 of them here with placards and flags. They're very prominently placed because they're also coloured yellow, so they're impossible to miss, and they have the words on them, "Not my king." In a moment, I'm sure they will be chanting those words too, as they were when the King came past on his way into Parliament. Even though there's not a huge amount of protesters here, they were pretty vocal, chanting "Not my king" and also booing. So I'm sure the King would have been able to hear that too. And as you can hear, they're starting up again here as they can see the carriage come into view. Now, organisers said they were expecting around 500 demonstrators. We're nowhere near that amount, but the ones who have turned up are certainly making themselves heard and seen. Even though it is vocal, I would say it's very civilised protest and operating within the area they've been afforded by police. There's a lot of police officers here keeping their distance, allowing the protest to take place. And here we go, the boos are starting now as King Charles and Queen Camilla come past. As you can probably see, the protesters also stretch up Whitehall slightly, and those placards, more of them saying "Not my king," would be impossible for the King to miss.
Thank you, Ivor. Well, you can see there the King and Queen making their way back to Buckingham Palace from the Palace of Westminster after delivering the first King's Speech in 70 years, passing the small but vocal, shall we say, group of anti-monarchy protesters near Parliament and making their way back to Buckingham Palace, where Laura Bundock is currently. And Laura, politically, probably not a day to shift the dial, but it did feel like a moment in history, didn't it?
Age just 2, and then Prince of Wales, Charles, watched as his grandfather delivered his last. This was his first all those years later. He, of course, deputised for the late Queen last year, but was not because he was not monarch, had not been crowned, didn't wear the imperial state crown, didn't wear any ceremonial robes. So a big moment for him as well. And I think his delivery was so interesting, wasn't it? We've spoken a lot about how much we know about the King's personal views, so much more than the late Queen's. He was Prince of Wales for so many decades, outspoken, a campaigning figure, especially when it came to the climate crisis and other pressing issues. But I think the climate perhaps top of his agenda. But when he delivered the words talking about oil and gas exploration and leasing, there was no glimmer of any of his personal views on that, views which are well known. I mean, this year. Remember, he was told not to attend by Liz Truss, something Rishi Sunak then kept when he became Prime Minister. But today, this sort of neutral delivery from the King, putting aside any personal view he may have as monarch, he must sit above politics. He must deliver the speech as written by his ministers without showing any of his personal sides. But certainly from the ceremonial side of things, we've seen a lot of ceremony, haven't we, with the state funeral of the late Queen, the coronation as well. But these are all big moments for any monarch, particularly, I think, for the King himself now stepping into that role and delivering the King's speech.
Thank you, Laura. As Laura is saying, a big moment for King Charles, the person who will have watched his mother, his late mother, giving the Queen's speech for so many years. And today, the very first time that he delivered the King's speech, the first King's speech in 70 years as monarch. He travelled to the Houses of Parliament in the Diamond Jubilee state coach in the ceremony going back centuries. And you can see him there with his Queen Camilla in that carriage, returning to Buckingham Palace after delivering the government's legislative programme for the year ahead. 21 bills, but few surprises in the actual speech, unlikely to move the dial politically, but still a big ceremonial moment. And Beth, when it came to the actual content of the speech itself, just looking at that carriage, of course, pulling through the arches there, unlikely to shift the dial.
Yeah, unlikely to shift the dial. And also, we were talking about kind of the impact a Prime Minister can and can't make. And I went back to see what Boris Johnson did in the last Queen's speech we had, which was back in May 2022, so 18 months ago. And there were 37 bills in that speech. You had to go back to 2005 to Tony Blair to find a Prime Minister that had stuffed more into a Queen's speech, well, then Queen's speech, now we have a King's speech, than Boris Johnson. And,
so Rishi Sunak quite restrained then?
Well, I was going to say, so now I've got this document here about kind of how far back you have to go. And it looks like you'd have to go back to 2014. There were 11 bills in that particular Queen's speech. So quite restrained. In terms of what he's dishing up there. But also, if you look back to, I look back to kind of when Sam and I and you were talking about kind of the impact a Prime Minister can make in this kind of abstract legislative moment. You know, when Boris Johnson did his one back in May 2022, it was all about levelling up. That was the kind, you think about it, it's the post-COVID moment. He wanted to get back on his agenda of 2019, and it was billed as the levelling up then Queen's speech. But outside of all of that, there was a massive row about cost of living and how was the government helping people with inflation and bills, and was there going to be an emergency budget? And there was a big row about that. And it goes back to this idea that these things don't happen in a vacuum. So Rishi Sunak can put out a speech, but, you know, Labour, I imagine, will immediately say, where's the help for cost of living? Where's the more immediate stuff that voters might want or look to from a government? And also, I think that whatever Rishi Sunak does at the moment, he is being dragged down by things out of his control, if you like, happening, which is the COVID inquiry, reminding people about the chaos of the Johnson years. There is this question around sexual misconduct and what the party didn't or did do in terms of handling that. He's got Nadine Dorries' serialisation of her version of events around Boris Johnson's downfall and the kind of rows within the Conservative Party all bubbling up. And so all of these things, I think, project into an image of a party kind of, to quote one former cabinet minister, kind of the last gasp of oxygen, as they put it to me, in the dying days of a government. Now, I'm sure Rishi Sunak's team would absolutely robustly reject that framing, but it's undoubtable that he has external political factors at the moment that are kind of potentially knocking him even further off course.
Really interesting to chew over the political implications of this. We can see there the pageantry beginning to, I guess, enter the last leg of the marathon, if you like, Andrew. They're returning to Buckingham Palace. What are we looking at now?
Yeah, we're looking at, I suppose, the tail end of it. And as was said earlier, now it's over to the politicians. And this tells us that although in our constitution we have a ceremonial bit, we have a political bit, but they're never that far apart in a way. They're distinct, but there's things going on, and we can't escape the fact that this speech is probably the last speech before a general election, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So those two things do overlap, even though they're distinct as well.
And it does feel strange, doesn't it, in a way, because we have all this ceremony to show the separation of government and monarchy. We have the Black Rod theatre, and yet there is still something quite bizarre, I think, isn't there, about listening to the King deliver the Prime Minister's words?
It is very strange, and this was, I think, the first part of parliamentary proceedings ever to be televised back in 1958. And if you go back to the discussions back then they were worried about, will this confuse the public? Will they not be able to understand why the monarch appears to be setting out a political programme? So, it is interesting, and hopefully we've conveyed today to the viewers what is actually going on. But yes, certainly it's an unusual thing.
It's an amazing piece of ceremony. It's never been properly costed, but the last time people went into the figures, this whole pageantry that you're talking about, just the Parliament bit alone costs over £250,000.
So that's just the Parliament bit, not the procession that we're looking at now. That excludes
the royal elements, security, all the policing, and I guess what we're seeing on the screen at the moment. But everybody thinks it's worth it, I think, because it is a moment of continuity. And that's what the King really wants this King's speech, I think, to stand for, continuity, to show that he did it as his mother did it, because we could have a different system. We could have a president. We might not have a monarchy. We could have an elected president like they do in Ireland. But this is a different system where part of the stability of the nation rests on the monarch, in this case the King, performing his duties in the way that we saw today.
And as you say, a moment where we really see the reality of our constitution and what that means, even if it is the theatre around it, as you say, it has a meaning too. Well, you can see there the horses breaking into a trot as they approach Buckingham Palace. Let's bring Laura Bundock back in, shall we, who is at Buckingham Palace for us. Laura.
You can see here the household cavalry which have been accompanying this royal procession, making their way towards the end of the Mall and up towards the front of Buckingham Palace. The King and Queen in the Diamond Jubilee State coach behind them. There will be a guard of honour as the King arrives at Buckingham Palace, and there will be a march past as well before all these soldiers, there must be several hundred here today, will return to their barracks. One interesting thing to mention as well is once the King has arrived back at Buckingham Palace, the MP that has been held hostage against his safe return will then be released. So inside Buckingham Palace, an MP is being held. That's a tradition that goes way back. But you can see here the state coach, not the gold state coach, which has been used historically, but the Diamond Jubilee, said to be a much more comfortable ride, bringing the King and Queen back. They have been derobed. They would have returned to the royal robing room in Parliament. Those robes of state taken off, the imperial state crown removed, will be returned to the Tower of London, where it lives. But back now at Buckingham Palace. You hear the national anthem now being played by the military band waiting the King's return. A slight wave there from the King, probably relieved it is over. It's a big moment for him. The first time he's delivered this speech as King. We often think these moments will be a reminder of the late Queen as well, who for so many years delivered the Queen's speech. Now a King's speech.
With the carriage now back inside Buckingham Palace, King Charles delivering the speech that he will have watched his late mother doing for so many years, the first King's speech in 7 decades. And he began it, of course, saying that he was mindful of the legacy of service and devotion to this country set by his mother, the late Queen, delivering the first King's speech in over 70 years. Unlikely to really shift the political dial, but a big constitutional moment, and really a slice of history too, as King Charles officially sets out the government's legislative programme for the year ahead. And the procession, there you can see, filing back through the gates of Buckingham Palace, making that journey back from the Palace of Westminster. An important moment of ceremony and pageantry, which really, I think, goes to the heart of our constitution. As Sam was saying earlier, it's not a presidential system we have, it is a system of monarchy, and that split between the monarchy and the government really bleeding through all of the pageantry of the day, whether it is the theatre around Black Rod, whether it is the completely non-committal way that the King delivers the speech to show they're not his words, they're words written by the Prime Minister.
Notice, Sophie, you couldn't see the King getting out of the carriage. There is no accident in that. They were very careful to ensure that his late mother was never seen getting in and getting out wherever possible. So too, what we are looking at is very carefully thought out by the palace.
You can just see the reflection there through the window, the glimpse. And Andrew, what are we looking at now?
I think we're looking at the very closing stages of the whole thing. It sounds like the King's troop are doing their final bits with the guards. There we go, the saluting, they're holding the standard.
And the King and Queen back in Buckingham Palace, the pageantry over, and now it feels like perhaps it is a good time for us to really deep dive into the politics of the speech, because yes, this is a moment of ceremony, yes, this is a moment of constitutional importance, but it is also the moment when we see what laws and what bills the government is bringing forward over the year ahead. 20 bills, whether it's future licensing of oil and gas fields, whether it is help for leaseholders, whether it is sentencing reform. Time now, I think, to really deep dive into what this actually means in practical terms for the year ahead. Sam Coates has been analysing the text, deep diving into the text. Sam, take us through it.
So I want to start, we always look for meanings on days like today as we open up the screen to have a look at all these things. So I'm going to give you some statistics. Beth mentioned that there were the fewest number of bills since 2014 in this King's Speech. It's also, fascinatingly, the longest, 1,223 words. That's the longest monarch speech since 2005. So you've got that contrast there. Let's have a little look at the screen about some of the things that we have that we can see. If we can open up here. So if we can have a look at the list of bills that the government has published, and here it comes, we hope.
We can see it on our TV screens at least. So what are we looking at, Sam?
OK, so on King's Speech Day, the government releases a full list of all the bills that they are hoping to pass in the next few days. Now, one of the secrets of King's Speech Day is that some of them were already making their way through Parliament. As it happens, 6 of them, they're the ones with green dots alongside them, the Digital Markets Bill, Data Protection, Renters, Holocaust, Economic and Victims Bills. All of those aren't new bills. So really, what we're talking about, what we're looking at, what we're interested in is the new bit, and there are just 15 of those new bills. There is also one draft bill. Forget draft bills. They're not going to happen before the general election. That's the draft rail reform bill. Now, what I want to do is I want you to focus on just one bill as we start. That's possibly the most important bill here. Now, what you're looking at on the screen is all the notes that we as journalists have been given when it comes to this bill. It's probably easiest if I sit down and just chat it through with you, Sophie. And I just want to focus on the Criminal Justice Bill. Now, the Criminal Justice Bill is perhaps the flagship of all of it. And it does lots of things that Rishi Sunak wants you to know about, including compelling defendants to attend their sentencing hearing. So that's a big promise after Lucy Letby. There's a really controversial proposal in there where they could use polygraph tests. You could just sit at the bottom of your screen, polygraph tests for serious terrorist or sexual offenders. Now, government documents suggest that polygraph tests wrong on about 20% of occasions. So that's quite a big quite a big deal. But I want you to focus on this because it tells you a story of the last few days and a story of where we are right now. Have a look at this that I'm just zooming in on. And it is the crackdown on crimes and antisocial behaviour that blight communities. Now, Sophie, you will know from the last few days that we were told about a crackdown on homelessness. We were told that homeless people in tents, the tents taken away, that charities who effectively charities that handed out tents were potentially going to be prosecuted or criminals were going to be barred. And look at that on the screen. It's not there. It's not there. This is the legislation that we are told, as recently as this morning, that it would be in, but there is nothing down in writing. This is a fascinating glimpse into the kind of battles that we're seeing at the moment in Whitehall. At the weekend, Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, leaned into this story, said that homelessness was a lifestyle choice. And there was clearly discomfort from other ministers. And now we're looking at an absence of that being in the document that we are told about. What's going on? Now, if we talk to some people in government, they say, don't worry, we've got collective agreement for all of this, it's happening. But other people just point to that document and go, it's not there. That's the kind of story that you get by going deep in. This big thing that dominated the news for 3 days just isn't there. We've got to find out how.
Why do you think that is? Do you think it was Suella Braverman busking, going a bit further than they hoped? Do you think that they've rode back over the last couple of days? Well, I mean, I guess we don't know.
Well, I think what we have seen, and I mean, you've been digging into this, Sam, but what we definitely have seen is language from the Home Secretary about homelessness being a lifestyle choice that has clearly rattled other people in government. And Claire Coutinho, a key ally of Rishi Sunak, rumoured that potentially she'll take over as Chancellor before the next general election, was asked about this on Sky News. She said, it is not language I would use. So I think what we can glean from all of that is that Suella Braverman may have been using language or pushing something that maybe the Prime Minister isn't comfortable with, doesn't want to legislate for. So what you can sense in that, and is there's a party split in all of this, which makes it messy, doesn't it? And then it's unclear, as Sam was saying, about will it or won't it be put into legislation. I think it's a reflection of the splits within the Conservative Party, and also for a Prime Minister that has a Home Secretary that in policy terms might not be disaligned with government policy, but in presentational and rhetoric terms is really out of kilter with a Prime Minister that isn't comfortable with the language she uses. He was asked about it yesterday and he just kind of avoided it, but he definitely didn't endorse it.
Yeah, you're right. Anything else that jumped out of you from the speech today, Sam?
I mean, there's a huge amount, and we'll go through it over the course of the next couple of hours. But whether it is the stuff around smoking and automated cars, that stuff that is genuinely going to transform our society, whether it's the detail, which is slightly less impressive than the headlines around housing policy, there's an awful lot to look into.
Mm-hmm. Certainly is. Thank you both for your analysis. Thank you, Andrew, as well, for talking us through the ceremony as well. You are watching Sky News. Coming up, we are going to be looking more at the content of the King's speech with some of the political reaction from both Labour and the Conservatives. See you then. Hello, welcome back. Now, for the first time in 70 years, a king has delivered the speech at the state opening of Parliament. In the last hour, King Charles performed the role for the first time as monarch. He set out the government's agenda for the upcoming year.
It is mindful of the legacy of service and devotion to this country set by my beloved mother, the late Queen, that I deliver this, the first King's speech in over 70 years. The impact of COVID and the war in Ukraine have created significant long-term challenges for the United Kingdom. That is why my government's priority is to make the difficult but necessary long-term decisions to change this country for the better. My minister's focus is on increasing economic growth and safeguarding the health and security of the British people for generations to come. My government will continue to take action to bring down inflation, to ease the cost of living for families, and help businesses fund new jobs and investment. My ministers will support the Bank of England to return inflation to target by taking responsible decisions on spending and borrowing.
Well, much of the speech focused on law and order, with the Conservatives keen to re-establish their credentials as tough on crime.
My government will act to keep communities safe from crime, antisocial behaviour, terrorism and illegal migration. A bill will be brought forward to ensure tougher sentences for the most serious offenders and increase the confidence of victims. My ministers will introduce legislation to empower police forces and the criminal justice system to prevent new or complex crimes, such as digital-enabled crime and child sexual abuse, including grooming.
Well, if it was a first for King Charles, it was also a first for Rishi Sunak, who is still Boris Johnson's Chancellor at the last state opening of Parliament. And with today's King's speech all but certain to be the last one before the next general election, the Prime Minister will be hoping that the policies announced today will be enough to help reverse the polls and ensure he's still in post for a second. So let's take a look now at some of the other policies that were unveiled by the King. An annual system will be introduced to award new oil and gas licences. The government insists it will help the UK reach net zero in a realistic way, but environmental campaigners are not happy. Less controversial are proposals to phase out smoking by raising the legal age people can buy cigarettes by 1 year every year. Those plans are supported by Labour, not all Conservatives happy though. Ministers have also confirmed that there will be a bill ensuring that all new houses in England and Wales are sold as freehold properties, phasing out leaseholds. There's a bill to allow driverless cars to operate on the roads for the first time without safety drivers. And there are also plans for a football regulator and licensing system to scrutinise clubs' owners and their financial resources. Well, to discuss the politics of the Saw, we're joined now by Greg Cook, who is the former head of political strategy for the Labour Party, and Hugh Bennett, a former special advisor to Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. Thank you both for being with us. Hugh, to you first. Do you think there was anything to kind of move the dial today?
Well, I think when you look at the contents of the King's speech, it's quite a safe King's speech from Rishi Sunak's perspective. It's gone hard on law and order, sort of normally comfortable territory for the Conservatives. I think what we've been hearing already from some in the Conservative Party is, is there enough here to really sort of shift the dial? This is an election year coming up. This is the last King's speech before an election. And so I think some people may have been left feeling a little bit underwhelmed. Eyes are now looking ahead towards the autumn statement, hoping that there'll actually be some policies that can really sort of kickstart what's the start of a long election campaign at the moment. So, I think there's some positive stuff in there. I think a lot of the criminal justice measures will be welcomed, but it's perhaps missing a big headline thing, as Number 10, I think, tried to set expectations in advance.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if the autumn statement is perhaps the bigger political moment, the lever, if you like, for the Prime Minister. Greg, Hugh, they're saying that it was a bit of a safe Queen's speech, King's speech, I should say. That really, but genuinely, it does kind of show, I think, what a what a moment it is in all of our lifetimes. You know, we're so used to seeing the Queen, and today to see King Charles doing the speech, it was a moment, you know, for me, I'm sure for lots of you at home as well. Hugh there saying it was a very safe King's speech. Do you think there's much in there for Labour to disagree with?
No, I mean, I think as an event, it's pretty insignificant, to be quite honest. I think it'll be pretty rapidly forgotten, although obviously the content of it included lots of measures which are very important in their different fields. But as something which is going to play any role in kind of shifting the dial on the polls, I think that's pretty unlikely. Nothing has shifted them over the last year.
I'm just going to jump in because I'm being told that we have got a bit of an issue with your microphone that we're going to try and sort out as soon as we can. Hugh, we're going to bring you in again. Greg was just saying that actually it was kind of an almost insignificant sort of moment politically. You know, is that a problem for Rishi Sunak? Because frankly, he is running out of levers ahead of the next election, or big moments, if you like, that he can actually try and make some kind of intervention if he really is to be pitching as the change candidate.
Yeah, well, the last King's speech before an election is always a challenge for the governing party, as obviously you don't have very long in between actually setting out the legislation. Any time for the legislation to come into effect, it's quite unlikely that a lot of the effects will actually be felt in a meaningful way before the next election. So you can see why they've gone for the strategy of actually looking at measures, criminal justice measures, things that can be sort of implemented quickly. They can say, look, we've done this, that's fine, and hopefully get some boost of that before the next election. I think when you look at the wider, some of the wider problems facing the country, big outstanding issues like planning reform. There's things on leaseholds, I think those will be welcome. There's things on rent reform, which I think have been a bit more controversial. But no action to sort of tackle the elephant in the room, which is that we don't really have enough houses in this country. So, again, difficult to do all of these things in the final year before an election. But, you know, I think the big sort of economic reforms that some people will be hoping for to really sort of shift the country over the coming years remain to be seen.
Let's try again.
Yeah.
Take two.
Yes.
I think we can hear you now, which is good.
Well, I mean, the question you asked was, will Labour be opposing or supporting this? I mean, I suspect that, a lot of the motivation for some of the individual measures would be to try and bait Labour into either having an internal argument or actually getting itself on the wrong side of what the government think is public opinion on this. I don't think Labour will probably fall for that.
Anything in particular you would pick out then?
Well, I mean, I think there are sections of the Labour Party that would be, have to bite its tongue over some of the penal reform agenda, the oil and gas licences and so on, that sort of thing. These are all kind of, and it may even be that some of the sentencing reform stuff is kind of preparing the ground to have another go at trying to accuse Keir Starmer of being soft on crime. But I think with the best will in the world, all of these kind of measures, whatever their merits are not going to, they're not going to really shift opinion on the thing that really matters, which is the Tory government destroyed its own credibility on the economy a year ago. And somehow, if Sunak is to have a chance in the general election, he has to, as you say, make himself the change candidate to draw a line under what happened then and try and show the Conservatives as a party that learned and moved on from that. And I don't think anything here, possibly the autumn statement will give us some more on that, but nothing here is really going to do that.
Do you agree with that, Hugh? Sunak having to show that he's different to the two people that you advised, Liz Truss and Boris Johnson?
Look, I mean, I think there's obviously a sense that economic reforms are needed. There are headwinds. Obviously, it's not just the UK facing these headwinds. You look across the rest of Europe, there's sluggish growth everywhere, but there's obviously a sense that things could be going better. The main levers that Rishi Sunak has to actually do something about that will be in the autumn statement and in the budget next year. So I think in terms of his approach to actually convincing people that he has the answers, he has the ideas that make it worth re-electing him to actually take the economy to a better place, I think he's got those two big moments that he can really use to sort of show the public that he can do that. And I think that's what everyone in his party will be hoping.
And what about Labour? Do Labour really need to do a bit more to get over the line, to prove that they are a government in waiting, that they're ready for the challenge? Because, look, they're doing a very good job about not falling into any of the little traps set to them by the Conservative Party. But is there anything that eye-catching in their own agenda?
I don't think anybody in Labour will be complacent or, believing some of the hype that's around about how, there's the victory is guaranteed, or even there'll be some kind of landslide. You need to kind of look beyond the headlines of what's in the polls and what the by-elections have said in that. And what, your own Sky poll last week was very interesting in this, which looked at what's happening with the people who voted Tory in 2019, and the huge bulk of them still who genuinely seem to be undecided about what to do. And, Labour didn't have great ratings amongst many of them, and so
but that's a bit of an issue for Labour, isn't it? I mean,
it is,
the Conservatives have been in power for 13 years, as you put it, crashed the economy, under sort of Liz Truss. Surely you should be convincing these people.
Yeah, but we're coming back from one of our most disastrous general election results 4 years ago. I think the ground that's been much aided by the government, but the ground which has already been made up is astonishing. Nobody would have believed that at this stage. But clearly, it's very hard for a party to reinvent itself over that shorter period of time and to have a positive appeal. And I think if Labour's going to kind of make inroads into those voters who seem to be still up for grabs, then it's going to have to develop that positive appeal and not simply rely on the government failing.
And what about the challenge for the Conservative Party? Do you think that Rishi Sunak needs to take, I guess, a few more risks than he did today if he is going to have a chance of being elected again?
No, I think he does, and it's exactly as Greg says. I think you basically have at the moment two leaders who are playing it quite safe. From Keir Starmer's perspective, that probably makes sense. He can see the Tories are struggling to turn around the polls, so if he can just stay out of trouble, stay out of controversy, he hope that he can ride it to victory. But that also presents risks in itself, because it means that there is an opportunity for Rishi Sunak if he can really discover some momentum, discover a real agenda that people get behind. Can Starmer actually rise to meet him at that level if Rishi is able to step up to that level? I think that's what will determine, I think, whether there will be a surprise, there will be a shift over the next year, or whether things just stay as they are at the moment.
Interesting to see. Also interesting to see, I have to say, one of my kind of favourite moments of today is always when you see Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, the two leaders having that slightly awkward walk. They know the cameras are going to be on them, they've got to get the tone right, friendly but not too friendly. I mean, what kind of things do you reckon they might have been chatting about?
I have no idea whatsoever. What the weather's like in Wellingborough and Blackpool, maybe. Who knows?
Exactly. Yeah, and some of the places that they've been trying to visit. It must be. I mean, Liz Truss and Boris Johnson have done those before. I remember the one with Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn. Boris Johnson very, very chatty and friendly. Jeremy Corbyn just not having any of it at all.
Yeah, no, I'm sure there have been many awkward conversations had over the years, walking on the long walk between the Commons and the Lords.
Thank you very much. Really interesting to get your analysis. Thank you. Stay with us. We'll have lots more reaction to the King's speech after the break.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders and now they're going to be arrested.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Hello, welcome back. Well, for the first time in 70 years, a king has delivered the speech at the state opening of Parliament. In the last hour, King Charles performed the role for the first time as monarch. He set out the government's agenda for the coming year.
It is mindful of the legacy of service and devotion to this country set by my beloved mother, the late Queen, that I deliver this, the first King's speech in over 70 years. The impact of COVID and the war in Ukraine have created significant long-term challenges for the United Kingdom. That is why my government's priority is to make the difficult but necessary long-term decisions to change this country for the better. My minister's focus is on increasing economic growth and safeguarding the health and security of the British people for generations to come. My government will continue to take action to bring down inflation, to ease the cost of living for families, and help businesses fund new jobs and investment. My ministers will support the Bank of England to return inflation to target by taking responsible decisions on spending and borrowing.
King Charles there, delivering the first King's speech in 70 years. Well, we're joined now by the former Business Secretary, Andrea Leadsom. Thank you for being with us. It felt like a big moment in terms of the monarchy, in terms of history, I guess, as well. Was it a big moment politically, do you think?
Well, I think it was. I mean, first of all, this is the new Carolean age. This is the first King's speech by King Charles III. So that of itself was a fantastic moment. And so I'm sure the UK around the world will become ever more sort of popular and watched, and people love to see the amazing way that we do these things. But in response to your question, yeah, I think it is. There is some huge amounts of legislation in that King's speech and some very important things for everybody around the UK, from promoting job security to promoting the new jobs of the future through AI and green technologies and digital future, making the UK a world leader, promoting free trade around the world, the sorts of things that people have been saying for so long. You know, our productivity is poor, you know, we're not earning enough. All of these things are investments for the future, and that's the Prime Minister's key message, is he is all about making big decisions that will give us a much stronger, better, more successful future.
At the same time, it didn't feel like a King's speech that was going to move the dial that much politically. I mean, the stuff has been announced before, you know, it was billed as the big kind of law and order moment. And yes, there's moves to try and make people attend sentencing hearings and have longer sentences for the most serious crimes. But at the very same time,
a huge deal,
but the issue to go alongside that is that, you know, crimes of where you have a sentence of less than a year, there shouldn't be a presumption of going to jail. If you look at the reality of what's happening, okay, the headline looks great, but it actually kind of crumbles once you get to the detail.
I completely disagree. So the absolute headline on Law and Order is to create a much safer society where those who commit the most horrendous of crimes go to prison for their full life sentence.
There's an awful lot of people who don't commit something where they're getting a life sentence. They commit something, for example, stalking, which can have a huge impact on the victim. Many of those people get less than a year.
And the government has already introduced a great deal of legislation against stalking to make it illegal to share sexual photos.
But if you get a sentence of less than a year, you might not end up in jail. For lots of people, that's a cop-out.
You know, the fact of the matter is that you cannot just send everybody to jail, but what the government is doing is making sure that those who commit the worst of crimes actually do serve their full sentences. The government is investing in new prisons, new prison places, a huge raft of new probation officers to supervise people who aren't serving longer term sentences. There's a real focus on rehabilitation, but also on making sure that those who commit the worst of crimes are properly punished. And, by the way, that victims are taken very much into account. What the government's seeking to do is to ensure that those who commit horrific offences are forced to go and hear themselves being sentenced and can't just stay downstairs with their barrister and refuse to face the victim that they have now been found guilty of offending against. So this is a big deal for law and order in our country. It really will move the dial, and I'm incredibly positive and optimistic about it.
The other thing that I'm a bit confused about is homelessness and the use of tents, because we've had lots of headlines in the last few days with the Home Secretary saying that she wants to stop effectively letting people have tents up if you're sleeping rough. But there was nothing really on that. Is that just gone away?
No, I think what the Home Secretary was saying is that the government, through its Homelessness Reduction Act, has really sought to make homelessness a thing of the past, has really invested in restoration of homelessness. And in fact, you know, in Northampton, where I represent a constituency, there's a fantastic charity that has a great deal of taxpayer funding to help people get their lives back together. So the challenge is that there are a raft of people who don't want to accept that help for all sorts of reasons, very often mental health problems, very often reasons of relationship breakdown, problems of having lost their job, etc. And actually, I think what the Home Secretary was trying to say is that it can't just be an option that you decide to just stay on the streets. There is the help for you.
The tent thing, that's just gone, has it?
No, I don't think it's gone. I don't think it wasn't billed as a measure in the King's Speech.
In the first place.
No, it absolutely is. The government has already legislated to reduce homelessness, the Homelessness Reduction Act, and has invested significant sums to make homelessness a thing of the past. During COVID, the Everybody In measures that literally got all homeless people off the streets was a fantastic thing, and the government has tried to ensure that that endures. And so what the Home Secretary wasn't talking about the King's Speech. He was talking about the need to ensure that choosing to live on the streets because you don't want to accept the help that's offered to you cannot endure. What people want to see, I mean, nobody wants to see homelessness. It's heartbreaking. You know, it's absolutely appalling to see people living on the streets. And what we have in place are measures to help people to turn their lives around and get off the streets. And that's what we need to focus on.
It feels like there's fewer and fewer levers for the Prime Minister to pull ahead of the next general election, kind of where he can reset, where he can really punch through and make a difference to change the political climate. Do you think that the autumn statement is perhaps a bigger moment for him than the King's Speech, and what does he need to do?
So I think the King's Speech is really important. It sets the next legislative period, and in it there are many measures, for example, renters reform to give people much more security of tenure, leasehold reform to stop people being ripped off with huge service charges, a big issue in my constituency. There's measures on energy security, protecting 200,000 jobs around the UK in oil and gas and actually saving people on their energy bills. There's huge measures in this, not just about law and order, but a broad range of measures. But yes, of course, the autumn statement, where we'll be talking about the economy specifically and measures to help people keep more of their hard-earned cash, that will be another very important moment for the government. But today, I think, is a great day.
OK, a great day. Dame Andrea Leadsom, thank you very much indeed. Dame Andrea Leadsom there, talking to us about the King's Speech and the measures announced by the government. Is it going to be enough to shift the dial? Coming up, we will have plenty more reaction to the King's Speech, including live reaction from Labour, the Lib Dems and the Scottish National Party, who may have a bit of a different take to the one that we've just heard. That all coming up after this break. Hello, good afternoon. For the first time in 70 years, a king has delivered the speech at the state opening of Parliament. Earlier, King Charles performed the role for the first time as monarch, setting out the government's agenda for the upcoming year.
It is mindful of the legacy of service and devotion to this country set by my beloved mother, the late Queen, that I deliver this, the first King's speech in over 70 years. The impact of COVID and the war in Ukraine,
maybe not. All sorts of other little details that we'll pick up through the afternoon, Sophie. But what it's clear is that when you go right down into the detail, perhaps even those 14, 15 bills that are new maybe don't amount to quite what you thought they were.
Really interesting, Sam. And as Sam was saying, it's always important to look at the detail of the stuff because this is what the government's actually doing. This is the laws that they're passing. And if there is any gap between the rhetoric on the one hand and the speech, then that is significant. Well, it was a big day for politics. It was also, of course, a big and significant day for the monarchy too. Our royal correspondent Laura Bundock is at Buckingham Palace for us. And Laura, it was the first King's speech for 70 years.
Yes, it was a very significant moment for the King, one of his milestone moments, if you like, making his way to Parliament. He's been before. Remember last year he deputised for the late Queen and read her speech out, but this was his first King's speech. And you have to look back to 1950 for the last time a king delivered the speech in the Houses of Parliament. The King himself was just aged 2 and was reportedly sitting on a wall watching the carriage procession go past. And here we are more than 7 decades later, and it is him now arriving at Parliament to deliver his speech. And we saw him there again wearing the ceremonial robes, the robes of state and the imperial state crown last on his head back on Coronation Day. He does, of course, read the words the government writes for him. But as I think what struck me was this interesting moment. This is a king who we know so much about. We know so much of his own personal views, but this certainly wasn't a moment for him to express any of those as monarch. This was a reminder that he sits above politics. He reads what the government tells him to read. And it was very interesting, wasn't it, hearing some of the Green policy announcement, that delivery deadpan and very deliberately so. He would not want to show any of his personal opinion in delivering this speech today.
And Laura, it's important to emphasise that it was a relatively small number of people, but there were some protests along the route as well, weren't there?
Yeah, Republicans have been protesting in increasing number, you've noticed. I mean, most recently at the coronation when several were arrested, but at other occasions where the King has been present, I can think of several off the top of my head. And this is something that would never have happened to the late Queen, but I think around 100 were outside the Houses of Parliament shouting, holding their yellow placards and shouting, "Not my King." And I think as much as this was a reminder of his constitutional role today, all the ceremony, the pomp, etc., it was also a reminder that we're in a very different age to when his mother was Queen, and an age where people will be protesting. And, you know, talk to the Republican movement here and they will say their numbers have doubled in recent times, and they will carry on protesting against the monarchy as the months and his reign progresses.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laura Bundock there. Now, I'm delighted to say our royal commentator, Alistair Bruce, is here, having completed his own role in the state opening of Parliament, wearing all of his finery. And you can see him here in the House of Lords. I just want to show you this before we talk to you. In the House of Lords as the King and Queen arrived. Now, Alistair led the sovereign procession to the Lord's Chamber in his role as Fitzalan Pursuant. I'm going to make sure I get the pronunciation right on that, setting the pace for the King. Extraordinary. Alistair, talk to us a little bit about the role that you had today.
Well, I'm the most junior of the heralds, and heralds have been looking after kings and queens coming into parliaments going back to the Middle Ages. And in a sense, this is a constitutional punctuation point in the political process, which is very brief, where the king, on behalf of his ministers and his government, reads out what they are now to debate, and is the activity really for this session of Parliament. But he does so with the attendant court that we represent. And the heralds have always done this right back to battles and also to great ceremonies. And it continues something that is uniquely British and part of particularly the English, but also the Scottish tradition. So it's rather special to see.
Yeah, really special, and so special as well to have a role in that moment as well. Putting the kind of politics to one side, it felt like a moment of history today. You know, the first King's speech in 70 years.
It was, and there was a sense that this was, in its own way, a new beginning and a milestone for the King, coming with his Queen at his side. We have become very familiar with the picture of the Queen delivering her speech, wearing the imperial state crown with that golden backdrop behind her. And to see all that the same, except with the King in place of the Queen, reminds us that we move forward. And now, with the King gone and all of us taking our robes and ceremonial uniforms off, the political process returns again. I mean, my job, particularly today, because I'm always at the front of the procession, is to set the pace. And I can say that with the rehearsals that we had, we did go slightly faster than we did with the late Queen. Yeah. But I think, you know, we're always tweaking it. And I think I was particularly proud when I took His Majesty and led him out again, that we went a little bit slower and it worked perfectly. And I think that effortlessly, with all the energy that people put into getting these things to look right, it did work very well, and the King was delivered to Parliament to do his constitutional duty and taken away again.
Give us a glimpse behind the scenes. How are the rehearsals for this? There must be so much.
Well, the army has its rehearsal very early in the morning, generally a couple of nights before. And for them, it's a really big deal coming through the streets of London with horses and carriages of the Royal Mews. But then in Parliament, it was yesterday we all gathered, and the Earl Marshal particularly organised the way in which the King and Queen would come in and take their seats on the thrones and then leave. And when you've got these two long trains with these young lads who are looking after them, you know, you need to make sure that that's going to work tidily. And I think it did work extremely well.
Who are the boys? We can see them now. Carefully arranging the train.
They're called pages of honour, and they tend to come from the families of people who work for the King and Queen, and their children are asked to step forward and play their part. At least it's a day off school.
Yeah, can you imagine? They must love it. What an honour. And it also feels a day when you see so much history and you really see our constitution up close, because you have the monarch saying the words of the government.
Yes, it's one of the great ironies of Britain that, you know, with all this red and gold splendour and the King, you might think that there is power. But of course, you and I know that the King has only ceremonial power on behalf of the nation as a sort of cohesive force. And then you see the almost chaotic approach of the members of Parliament from the Commons after they've been summoned by Black Rod, in whose face the door has been slammed to remind us when Charles I failed to behave in a constitutional manner. And then they come together in the House of Lords across this sort of sea of velvet and ermine. And the intent of the government is read out. And we see the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition. I mean, I can, from the throne end, I can see them side by side, hearing what it is that's going to be debated. But we know that this afternoon, and from now on, the fury of the political process will take over again. And we, in all our ceremonial kit, go home.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? I mean, you talk about that moment of Black Rod. Just unpick that a bit. Talk us through what the tradition of that and why it came about, the slamming of the doors.
Well, there was a very powerful MP called Pym in the time of King Charles I, who took against Charles I's powers. He regarded that his kingship was giving him the authority of God on earth, and not surprisingly, he didn't agree with that. And anyway, there was a long period of disagreement between King and Pym and many others in Parliament. And the King stormed over to Westminster and went with his soldiers into the Commons chamber, into the Parliament, and demanded the Speaker to hand over those representatives of the people. And the Speaker brilliantly turned round and said, "I have neither eyes to see nor voice to speak, save as this House shall command me." And what we see when Black Rod comes in is the door was slammed in her face. And then she comes in and she says, you know, the King commands this honourable House and will bow both ways, which is a way of recognising that You know, the King's messenger has had the door slammed in his face just so that the Commons can remind the King, don't you dare ever come in here again.
It's extraordinary. It's wonderful, really, in its own way as well. The other thing that really struck me today is you have the pageantry and the pomp and the tradition, and everything is done to such an exact standard, whether it's the arranging of the train or the setting of the pace that you did. And yet you also have a man, King Charles, who must have seen his mother give this speech so many times before, and he opened up, didn't he, by paying tribute to the late Queen as well. It's such a moment for him too, his first speech as monarch.
Yes, and for him after these last few years where he has been lifting from the position of being a parent to becoming the king, and we've watched him take command of much of what has become his, after watching his mother for 70 plus years, as it were, doing it herself. And occasionally he used to accompany her to Parliament, particularly when she was less able. And the late Duke of Edinburgh was not able or present to do so. And he gave the last Queen's speech as a Councillor of State with the now Prince of Wales beside him, because you needed to have two. But I think for him to now come into the House of Lords wearing the crown and take his position, and it's very difficult to read a speech when you've got 2.5 pounds of platinum and diamonds on your head, the nation's crown. And he did it, I think, remarkably well, and he delivered it with a pretty deadpan voice. Many people said, will he change the way he speaks in accordance with how he feels about individual bills that are being proposed by the government? And of course, the truth is, as a constitutional head of state, he certainly can't do that. And he didn't.
No, he didn't. It's true, isn't it, that it's strange. Normally you would expect the kind of rhetorical flourishes of a speech, but this is the opposite, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is a deadpan, straightforward delivery. And it did feel that overall you got the sense of a moment of change with the kind of government's legislative programme, Rishi Sunak's first as Prime Minister, the new-ish monarch, the King, but also it's such a time of continuity as well, and it does make you feel that, doesn't it, don't you think, the traditions that just built up over so many centuries.
And perhaps you can look at kingship, whether you approve of it or not, and recognise that constitutionally one of the things the king is there to ensure is that after 5 years, no matter how excited a prime minister might be to consider staying on, the king makes sure that the law will be met and there will be a general election. And that, in its own way, is a check and balance. And whilst kings don't tend to do anything of their own volition, a king can dissolve Parliament. And after 5 years, that is precisely what will happen if a general election hasn't by then been called.
Pretty big power. Thank you very much indeed. It's always such a pleasure to talk to you, particularly on such a big day. So thank you for hot-footing it into the studio.
You can't sit back in this. You have to stay very upright.
It's true. Thank you very much indeed, Alistair Bruce there.
Thank you so much for watching. I will be stopping it here, and I hope you've learned something from the royal family and the monarch and the British government, how they work hand in hand. I hope you learned something that will benefit you. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you sometime. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, and click the notification button so that when we're on, you will be notified. I really do appreciate your time, and you have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful day. God bless you. Bye-bye.